Green. Everything is green. It burns. The liquid burns against his skin, seeping into his pores, flooding his nostrils with the chemical reek of antiseptic and something worse, something metallic, something alive. He cannot breathe. Tubes snake down his throat, pumping air into lungs that scream for real oxygen, for anything but this sterile invasion. His eyes are open, but the world is murky. Filtered through the thick glass of a cylindrical prison, through the emerald haze of fluid that suspends him like a specimen in a jar. He tries to scream. No sound comes. Wires pierce his skull. Sensors monitor every electrical impulse firing through a brain that no longer feels like his own. He can see them. Shapes beyond the glass. White coats and clipboards. Faces obscured by surgical masks. They watch him with the detached curiosity of scientists observing a rat in a maze. Their mouths move. Words filter through the liquid, distorted and hollow. Vitals are stable. Begin the bonding. Process. Bonding. He does not know what that means. He does not know anything anymore. His name is gone. His memories are fractured things. Shards of glass cutting through fog. A woman's face, a snow-covered forest. The smell of gunpowder and blood. Nothing connects. Nothing makes sense. There is only this moment, this tank, this body that no longer belongs to him. Then the pain begins. It starts in his hands, a heat so intense it feels cold, spreading from his knuckles inward, crawling up his forearms like molten lava injected directly into his veins. He thrashes against his restraints, thick metal bands clamping his wrists, his ankles, his throat, but there is no escape. The heat reaches his elbows, his shoulders, his spine, his spine. The scream tears through his throat, past the tubes, filling the tank with bubbles of agony. They are pouring fire into his bones, liquid metal heated beyond any temperature flesh should endure, forced through surgical ports directly onto his skeleton. His healing factor, whatever strange gift or curse keeps him alive, fights against the intrusion, cells regenerating even as they are destroyed, skin knitting over entry wounds that are immediately reopened by the next injection. He can feel it fusing. The adamantium, he does not know this word, but somehow he knows it, bonding to calcium, to marrow, becoming part of him in a way that can never be undone. His ribs become cages of indestructible alloy. His skull becomes a helmet he can never remove. His claws, the claws, 3 blades of bone that have always lived within him, that he barely remembers using, are now sheathed in metal so strong it could cut through the walls of this prison, through the glass, through the scientists who did this to him. But he cannot reach them. The pain is too great. His mind is fragmenting, shattering into pieces that scatter like ash in wind. Hours pass, or days, or weeks. Time has no meaning in the tank. The scientists take notes. They run diagnostics. They speak in clinical terms about the subject and the weapon as if he were never a man at all. Perhaps he never was. Perhaps this is all he has ever been, an experiment, a tool, a thing to be forged and wielded and discarded when broken. They call him Weapon X. The 10th iteration, the success they have been waiting for. Something breaks inside him. Not his body. His body is unbreakable now, reinforced with 200 pounds of adamantium grafted to every bone in his frame. What breaks is deeper. The part of him that was human, the part that remembered kindness, that once knew love, that believed in something more than survival. It cracks down the middle and falls away, sinking into the green abyss, lost forever. What remains is rage, pure, primal, endless. He opens his eyes, truly opens them for the first time since they put him in this tank, and the scientists freeze. They see something in his gaze that their instruments never measured, something their experiments never accounted for. They see the animal they have created, the monster wearing human skin, the weapon that has decided it no longer wishes to be wielded. The restraints groan, metal bends, alarms blare. Sedate him now. Too late. The claws come out, not bone anymore. Adamantium, 3 blades per hand, 18 inches of indestructible metal slicing through the fluid, through the glass, through the first scientist who stands too close. Blood clouds the green. The tank shatters outward in an explosion of glass and chemical fluid, and the weapon drops to the floor of the laboratory, naked and dripping and screaming with a voice that sounds nothing like a man. He kills them all. Every scientist, every guard, every assistant who made the mistake of wearing a white coat in his presence. The claws move with instincts older than memory, older than language, driven by rage and pain, and something deeper. Something that will not stop until everything in this facility is dead. When it's over, he stands in a hallway painted red, alarms still wailing, emergency lights casting everything in crimson shadows. Bodies lie in pieces around him. He does not remember their names. He does not remember his own. There is only the cold, the blood, and the distant howl of Canadian wind beyond these walls. He runs, through corridors, through reinforced doors that mean nothing to claws that can cut through anything. Through the snow that bites his naked flesh, healing the frostbite as quickly as it forms. He runs until the facility is a speck behind him, until the trees swallow him whole, until there is nothing left but wilderness and the pounding of a heart that refuses to stop beating. Behind him, the Weapon X program burns. Ahead of him, there is only darkness. But to understand the monster, we must first meet the boy. Long before the tank, long before the metal, long before the blood and the rage and the century of violence that would define him, there was a boy. His name was James Howlett, and he was dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, persistently, in the way of Victorian children born to privilege but cursed with fragile constitutions. Allergies plagued him, to dust, to pollen, to the very air of the Alberta wilderness that surrounded his family's estate. His lungs rattled with every breath. His skin broke into rashes at the slightest provocation. He spent more days in bed than out of it, propped against pillows in a room that smelled of camphor and eucalyptus, watching the world through windows he was rarely permitted to open. The year was 1882. The place was Cold Lake, in the northern reaches of Alberta, Canada, a land of endless forests and brutal winters, where the wealthy built estates to escape the crowded cities of the south, and the poor worked themselves to death maintaining them. The Howlett estate sprawled across hundreds of acres, a monument to old money and older secrets, its grounds immaculate, its halls silent save for the footsteps of servants who knew better than to speak above a whisper. John Howlett Sr. ruled this domain with the quiet authority of a man who had never been questioned. Wealthy beyond measure, respected throughout the territory, he was everything a Victorian patriarch should be. Stern, distant, proper. He loved his son in the way such men loved their heirs, as extensions of themselves, as vessels for legacy, as obligations to be fulfilled rather than children to be cherished. He visited James's sick room dutifully, inquired about his health with appropriate concern, and retreated to his study where ledgers and land deeds demanded attention. Elizabeth Howlett was another matter entirely. She drifted through the mansion like a ghost, beautiful and broken, her eyes carrying a sorrow that predated her son's illness. The servants whispered about her, about the melancholy that gripped her, about the long hours she spent staring out windows at nothing, about the way she flinched when her husband entered a room. She loved James desperately, fiercely, with an intensity that sometimes frightened the boy. She would sit by his bedside for hours, reading to him, stroking his hair, weeping silently when she thought he was asleep. James did not understand his mother's tears. He was too young, too sheltered, too confined within the walls of his sick room to comprehend the complexities of adult misery. He only knew that she was sad, and that her sadness made him sad, and that he wished more than anything he could be strong enough to make her smile. He had two companions in those early years. The first was Rose O'Hara. Rose came to the estate when James was 7 years old, a young Irish girl with red hair and freckles and a spirit that refused to be diminished by her station. She was hired as James's companion, a playmate of appropriate age who could keep the sickly air company without overtaxing his delicate constitution. The Howletts paid her family handsomely for the privilege of her service, and Rose took to her duties with a warmth that transcended obligation. She read to James when his eyes were too weak. She told him stories of Ireland, of fairies and warriors and impossible adventures in lands across the sea. She pushed his wheelchair through the gardens on days when his lungs permitted outdoor air, describing the flowers and trees with such vivid detail that James felt he was seeing them for the first time. She became his window to a world he could not touch, his ambassador to a childhood he could not fully live. James loved her, not romantically, he was too young for such feelings, but with the pure, uncomplicated devotion of a lonely boy who had finally found a friend. His second companion was far more complicated. They called him Dog. His real name was unknown to James, perhaps unknown even to Dog himself. He was the son of Thomas Logan, the estate's groundskeeper, and he had been raised in the shadow of violence and whiskey and grinding poverty. Dog was roughly James's age, but where James was pale and fragile, Dog was weathered and hard, his eyes carrying a wariness that no child should possess. He worked alongside his father from dawn until dusk, chopping wood and hauling water and enduring beatings when Thomas Logan's temper flared. The two boys existed in parallel worlds. James, the heir, confined to silk sheets and silver spoons. Dog, the servant's son, sleeping on straw in a shack at the edge of the property. They were not supposed to be friends. Class dictated separation. Propriety demanded distance. But children, even Victorian children, find ways to breach the walls adults build around them. They met in the spaces between their respective prisons. James sneaking from his sick room on better days. Dog escaping his father's watchful eye when work permitted. They did not play as normal children played. James was too weak for roughhousing, and Dog had never learned how. Instead, they simply existed together. Two lonely boys finding solace in shared silence, in the knowledge that someone else understood what it meant to be trapped. Rose disapproved of the friendship. She saw the darkness in Dog's eyes, the bruises on his arms, the way he flinched at sudden movements. She worried that the groundskeeper's son would corrupt the gentle James, would drag him into a world of violence that no Howlett heir should know. But she said nothing to the adults. Servants who spoke out of turn did not remain servants for long. Thomas Logan was a monster. This was not hyperbole. This was not the exaggeration of frightened children or gossiping maids. Thomas Logan was a man whose soul had curdled into something foul, pickled in alcohol and resentment and rage. He beat his son for sport. He terrorized the other servants with impunity, knowing that John Howlett cared more about the grounds being maintained than about how they were maintained. He moved through the estate like a predator, his presence casting shadows wherever he walked. But his greatest sin was hidden, buried, known only to himself and to Elizabeth Howlett, who could not meet his eyes when he passed her in the halls. Years ago, before her marriage, Elizabeth had loved Thomas Logan. Or perhaps she had simply been young and foolish, drawn to a wildness that her proper upbringing had denied her. The affair had been brief, passionate, and ultimately catastrophic. When she discovered she was pregnant, she married John Howlett with desperate haste, praying that the child would favour its supposed father, that the secret would die with her. It did not. James Howlett had his mother's features, his mother's colouring, his mother's fragile constitution. But beneath the surface, in ways that would not manifest for years, he carried the blood of Thomas Logan. The groundskeeper knew. He had always known. And he watched the sickly heir with a hatred that bordered on obsession. Hatred for the boy who lived in luxury while his true son, Dog, suffered in squalor. Hatred for Elizabeth, who had chosen wealth over love. Hatred for himself, for the weakness that had allowed her to leave. The Howlett estate was a powder keg, and Thomas Logan was the match. But James knew none of this. He knew only his sick room, his books, his companions. He knew the way Rose's voice softened when she read poetry. He knew the way Dog's shoulders relaxed when they were alone, away from his father's fists. He knew the distant concern of John Howlett and the desperate love of Elizabeth. He also knew, though he could not explain it, that he was different. The illnesses that plagued him were severe but brief. Fevers that should have lasted weeks broke within days. Cuts healed faster than the doctor could explain. Once, when he fell from his wheelchair and gashed his knee on a garden stone, Rose had run to fetch bandages and returned to find the wound already closing, the blood already dry. She did not speak of it. Neither did James. Some secrets are too strange for words. In the quiet of his sick room, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and the shadows of secrets, James Howlett waited for his life to begin. He did not know that it would begin in blood. He did not know that the father he called father was not his father at all. He did not know that the boy called Dog would become his enemy, or that the girl called Rose would become his salvation, or that the claws sleeping beneath his skin would one day wake and change everything. He was just a boy, sickly, sheltered, innocent. It would not last. The snow fell thick that evening, blanketing the Howlett estate in white silence. It was the winter of 1885, 3 years after Rose had first arrived, and James was 12 years old. He had grown stronger in those years. Not strong, never strong, but stronger. The allergies had faded somewhat. The fevers came less frequently. He could walk the grounds now without his wheelchair, could climb the stairs to his room without stopping to catch his breath. He did not know that this night would be his last in this house, his last as James Howlett, his last as a boy. It began with shouting. Thomas Logan had been drinking since noon, as he often did when the winter darkness crept in early and the cold made work impossible. By nightfall, he was beyond drunk. He was deranged, consumed by a rage that 3 years of resentment had fermented into poison. He had watched the sickly air grow healthier. He had watched his own son, Dog, grow harder and more broken. He had watched Elizabeth avoid his gaze, pretend he did not exist, live her comfortable lie while he rotted in a shack at the edge of the property. Tonight something snapped. He stormed across the snow-covered grounds, Dog trailing reluctantly behind him. The boy knew this mood. He knew what his father was capable of when the whiskey took hold, but he also knew better than to disobey. Disobedience meant broken bones. Disobedience meant weeks of pain. So Dog followed, his heart pounding, praying that whatever his father intended would end quickly. Thomas did not knock on the mansion's door, he kicked it in. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Wood splintering, hinges screaming, the cold night air rushing into the warm foyer. Servants scattered, maids screamed. John Howlett emerged from his study, his face a mask of aristocratic fury, demanding to know the meaning of this intrusion. Thomas answered with a shotgun blast. The first shot missed. Whether by accident or design, no one would ever know. It tore through a portrait on the wall, scattering oil and canvas across the floor. The second shot found its mark. John Howlett crumpled, his chest a ruin of blood and bone, his eyes wide with the shock of a man who had never imagined such violence could touch him. He was dead before he hit the ground. Elizabeth screamed. The sound was not surprise, it was recognition. She knew this moment had been coming. She had known it for 12 years, since the day she chose wealth over love and condemned them all to this reckoning. She ran for the stairs, for James's room, for the only thing in this house that still mattered. Thomas followed. James heard everything, the gunshots, the screaming, the heavy footsteps ascending the stairs. He was out of bed before Rose could stop him, before his own fear could paralyze him. He threw open his door and stepped into the hallway just as his mother reached the landing, just as Thomas Logan emerged behind her with the shotgun still smoking in his hands. Time slowed. James saw his mother's face, pale, terrified, streaked with tears. He saw Thomas Logan's face, flushed with whiskey and rage, twisted into something barely human. He saw Dog, hanging back at the bottom of the stairs, his expression a battlefield of horror and helplessness. And then Thomas grabbed Elizabeth by the hair and threw her to the ground. "You think you're better than me?" he roared, standing over her, the shotgun forgotten in favour of his fists. "You think you can pretend I don't exist? That boy is mine! Mine!" James did not understand. The words made no sense, but understanding did not matter. What mattered was that this man, this monster, was hurting his mother. What mattered was the rage building in his chest, hot and bright and overwhelming. What mattered was the strange sensation in his hands, a pressure beneath his knuckles that demanded release. "Get away from her!" His voice cracked. He was 12 years old, barely 5 feet tall, thin as a rail. Thomas Logan turned and laughed, a brutal, mocking sound that died in his throat when he saw the boy's eyes. They were not the eyes of a sickly child anymore. They were something else, something feral, something ancient. "What are you going to do, boy?" Thomas sneered, releasing Elizabeth to face this new threat. "You going to fight me? You can barely stand up. Straight." James did not answer. He could not. The pressure in his hands had become agony, a tearing sensation like something trying to claw its way out of his skin. He looked down and watched in horror as his knuckles split open, as blood poured down his fingers, as 3 bone protrusions emerged from each hand. 6 inches of white, jagged bone, slick with blood and tissue. He screamed. Thomas screamed. Elizabeth screamed a name. Thomas! And then a truth that would shatter everything. "He's your son!" The words hung in the air like a curse. James heard them but could not process them. His father. This man. This monster who had just murdered John Howlett, who had terrorized Dog for years, who stood now with fear replacing rage in his bloodshot eyes. This was his father. The claws moved before thought could intervene. James lunged forward with speed he did not know he possessed, driven by instinct and agony, and a rage that felt inherited, felt genetic, felt like the truest thing he had ever known. The bone claws plunged into Thomas Logan's chest, piercing flesh and muscle and heart. Blood sprayed across James's face. Warmth coated his hands. Thomas looked down at the wounds with something like surprise. Then he looked at his son, his true son, with something like recognition. "Just like me," he whispered. And then he was gone. His body slid off the claws and crumpled to the floor, and Thomas Logan was dead, killed by the child he had never acknowledged and never loved. James stood frozen, staring at the corpse, at his hands, at the bone protrusions that still jutted from his knuckles like accusations. He did not understand what had happened. He did not understand what he was. He only understood that he had killed a man, killed his father, and that nothing would ever be the same. Elizabeth rose slowly from the floor. She looked at her son, at the blood on his face, at the claws emerging from his hands. She looked at Thomas's body. She looked at the ruin of everything she had built, every lie she had told, every secret she had buried. "Monster," she whispered, and it was not clear whether she meant Thomas or James or herself. Then she walked to the window, opened it, and stepped out into the night. James screamed her name. He ran to the window, looked down, saw her body broken on the flagstones below, saw the snow already beginning to cover her like a shroud. His mother who had loved him desperately, who had read to him when he was sick, who had wept by his bedside and called him her precious boy. Gone. Rose found him there, standing at the window, covered in blood, his bone claws still extended, his eyes empty of everything but shock. She did not scream. She did not run. She took his hand, carefully avoiding the claws, and pulled him away from the window. "We have to go," she said. Her voice was steady even as her hands trembled. "James, we have to go now." He did not argue. He could not. His mind had fractured, split into pieces that would never fully reassemble. He allowed Rose to lead him down the stairs, past Thomas's body, past John Howlett's body, past Dog who stood in the foyer with tears streaming down his face and hatred already kindling in his eyes, out into the snow, out into the darkness, out into a world that would never welcome him again. Behind them, the Howlett estate fell silent. 2 bodies cooled in the hallway, 1 body froze beneath a window, and a dynasty that had stood for generations ended in a single night of blood and revelation. James Howlett was dead. Whatever emerged from that house, fleeing through the snow with bone claws slowly retracting into healing flesh, was something else entirely. Something that would one day be called Wolverine. They ran north, through forests thick with snow and shadow, through valleys where the wind cut like knives, through a wilderness that seemed determined to swallow them whole. Rose led the way, her red hair tucked beneath a wool cap, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air. James followed in silence, his eyes fixed on the ground, his hands buried in his pockets where no one could see the scars that had already healed over his knuckles. He had not spoken since leaving the estate. 3 days of walking, of hiding in barns and begging scraps from isolated farmhouses, and James Howlett had not uttered a single word. Rose filled the silence with practicalities: where they would sleep, what they would eat, how far they needed to travel before they could consider themselves safe. She did not ask about what had happened. She did not need to. She had seen the bodies. She had seen the claws. On the 4th day, as they approached a trading post on the edge of the Yukon Territory, Rose stopped and turned to face her companion. "You cannot use your real name," she said. "James Howlett is wanted for murder. James Howlett is the son of a wealthy family, and there will be people looking for him. If we are to survive, you must become someone else." He looked at her with hollow eyes. "Who?" Rose hesitated. The name came to her unbidden, rising from some dark corner of her mind. The name of the man who had started all of this. The man whose blood now flowed through the boy standing before her. It was cruel, perhaps. Ironic, certainly. but it was also fitting, a reminder of what he came from, a warning of what he might become. "Logan," she said. "From now on your name is Logan." He accepted it without argument, without recognition. The trauma had fractured his memory, scattered the pieces of his past like leaves in wind. He remembered fragments, a woman's face, a snow-covered estate, the feeling of bone pushing through flesh, but the connections between them had dissolved. He was Logan now, Logan from nowhere, Logan with no past and no future, only the endless present of survival. They found work at a quarry in the mountains of British Columbia. The Yukon had proven too remote, too lawless, too dangerous for a young woman and a boy barely into his teens. The mining camp was safer, relatively speaking, a collection of rough wooden buildings clustered around a gaping wound in the earth, populated by men who had fled their own pasts and asked no questions of others. Rose found employment as a cook's assistant. Logan found something else entirely. The cage fights began as entertainment for the miners, brutal, bare-knuckle brawls conducted in a makeshift ring behind the main bunkhouse. Men wagered their meagre earnings on which worker could beat another bloody, and the winners earned enough to drink away their sorrows for another week. It was savage and primitive, exactly the kind of spectacle that should have repulsed a boy raised in silk sheets and silver spoons. Logan excelled at it. The first time he stepped into the ring, he was 15 years old and weighed barely 130 pounds. His opponent was a mountain of a man, a former lumberjack with fists like sledgehammers and a reputation for breaking bones. The fight was supposed to last 30 seconds. It lasted 3 minutes, and at the end of it, the lumberjack was unconscious, and Logan was standing over him without a scratch. Word spread. More challengers came. Bigger men, meaner men, men who had killed before and would kill again. Logan beat them all. He fought with a ferocity that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than muscle and bone, a rage that burned cold and constant beneath his skin. The miners began calling him the Wolverine, after the animal known for its viciousness, its refusal to back down, its willingness to fight creatures 10 times its size. The name stuck, the money flowed, and Logan began to change. The sickly boy from the Howlett estate was gone, replaced by something harder and sharper. His body filled out with muscle, his senses sharpened to supernatural acuity. He could smell a man's fear before the fight began, could hear heartbeats quicken when opponents realized they had made a terrible mistake. The healing factor that had once manifested as quick recovery from childhood illness now worked in real time, knitting together split lips and broken ribs between one round and the next. He was becoming something more than human, and something less. Rose watched this transformation with growing unease. She had saved the boy called James. She was not certain she could save the man called Logan. He spoke rarely now, smiled never, spent his nights alone at the edge of camp, staring into darkness as if waiting for something to emerge from it. The gentle child who had listened to her stories of Ireland had been replaced by a creature of violence and silence. And then there was Smitty. His real name was Smithson, and he was the camp foreman, a kind man in an unkind place, with gentle eyes and a way of speaking that reminded Rose of home. He treated her with respect when other men treated her as property. He listened to her stories. He made her laugh for the first time since that terrible night at the estate. Rose fell in love, slowly at first, then completely. Logan noticed. Of course he noticed. His senses were too sharp to miss the way Rose's heartbeat quickened when Smitty entered a room, the way her scent changed when she looked at the foreman. He said nothing. He had no right to say anything. But something dark stirred in his chest, something that felt like jealousy and grief and rage all twisted together. He was losing her, the only person left who knew who he truly was, the only tether to a past that grew more distant with each passing day. Then Dog arrived. 3 years had passed since the night at the Howlett estate, but Dog Logan had not forgotten. He had not forgiven. His father was dead, killed by the boy who had been given everything while Dog received only beatings and contempt. The hatred had festered, grown, consumed everything else until there was nothing left but the need for revenge. He tracked them across half of Canada. Through trading posts and mining camps, through rumours and whispers, following the trail of a red-haired girl and a boy with an unusual talent for violence. When he finally found them, Standing at the edge of the quarry as the sun set behind the mountains, Dog felt something like peace for the first time in years. The peace of knowing that tonight someone would die. "You murdered my father," Dog said, his voice carrying across the cold air. "You took everything from me." Logan turned slowly. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Not of Dog specifically, but of the violence he represented, the past that refused to stay buried. His hands clenched at his sides. The pressure beneath his knuckles returned, familiar now, almost welcome. "I don't know you," Logan said. And it was true. The memories were gone, wiped clean by trauma and time. "You will," Dog replied, and attacked. They fought like animals. No technique, no strategy, just pure savage fury unleashed in the fading light. Dog had grown strong in the years of hunting, hardened by rage and deprivation. Logan had the healing factor, the claws that threatened to emerge at any moment, the instincts honed by countless cage fights. They tore at each other with fists and teeth and fingernails rolling across the rocky ground, leaving trails of blood in the snow. Rose heard the commotion and came running. She saw them struggling at the edge of the quarry, saw the hatred twisting Dog's face, saw the feral gleam in Logan's eyes. She did not think, she simply acted, throwing herself between them, trying to separate two forces that could not be separated. The claws came out. Logan did not mean to do it. The claws emerged reflexively, triggered by the chaos and the violence and the desperate need to survive. 3 bone blades, 6 inches long, erupting from his knuckles at the exact moment Rose stepped into their path. They pierced her chest, slid between her ribs, found her heart. Time stopped. Dog stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock. Logan looked down at the woman impaled on his claws, at the blood spreading across her dress, at the expression of surprise frozen on her face. She tried to speak. Her lips formed his name, not Logan, but James, the name she'd given him, the name he had forgotten, and then the light left her eyes. He caught her as she fell, held her against his chest as the bone claws retracted, as the wounds in her body gaped open, as the snow began to fall and cover them both in white. He did not scream. He did not weep. He simply held her, this woman who had saved him, who had given him a name, who had been the last remnant of his humanity. And he felt something die inside himself, something that would never return. When he finally looked up, Dog was gone, fled into the wilderness, his revenge complete in ways he had never intended. The quarry was silent. The miners had not yet discovered what had happened. There was no one to witness the moment. Logan laid Rose gently on the ground, closed her eyes with trembling fingers, and walked away into the darkness. He did not return to the camp. He did not return to anything. The man called Logan vanished into the Canadian wilderness, into the forests and mountains where no one would find him, where no one would know him, where he could become the animal he had always feared he was. For years, there would be no trace of him, only rumours, only legends. The Wolverine had been born in blood. Now he would be forged in solitude. The decades that followed exist only in fragments, shattered memories, disconnected images, faces without names and battles without context, scattered across the landscape of a mind that has been broken and rebuilt so many times that the original architecture is unrecognizable. Logan, for that is the only name he answers to now, does not remember these years in sequence. He remembers them in flashes, in nightmares, in moments of sudden recognition when a smell or a sound triggers something buried deep. What follows is not a chronology. It is an excavation. The first flash, trenches, mud and blood and the screaming of dying men. The year is 1915, and the fields of France have become an abattoir. Logan crouches in a trench somewhere near Ypres, surrounded by soldiers who will be dead within the hour, their bodies destined to rot in no man's land alongside thousands of others. The Germans are preparing another assault. Artillery shells whistle overhead, each explosion sending geysers of earth and flesh into the grey sky. He should not be here. He is Canadian, fighting with a regiment that accepted him without questions, without paperwork, without any of the documentation that civilized warfare supposedly requires. They call him Lucky Jim because he survives things that kill other men. Bullets pass through him, and the wounds close. Shrapnel tears his flesh and he keeps fighting. Gas attacks that leave his comrades choking on their own. Dissolving lungs leave him coughing but alive, his healing factor burning out the poison faster than it can kill. The soldiers fear him, not because of his ferocity in battle — many men are ferocious when survival demands it — but because of what he becomes during the fighting. His eyes change, his movements become something other than human. He does not fight like a soldier, he fights like a predator, and the enemy has learned to run when they see him coming. The war ends, another begins. The second flash, a shield, red, white, and blue. A man in a costume that should be ridiculous but somehow isn't, fighting alongside Logan in a Hydra facility deep in occupied Europe. The year is 1944. Captain America moves with the precision of a weapon designed for exactly this purpose, but his eyes carry something Logan's do not. Hope. Belief. The conviction that good will triumph over evil if only enough good men are willing to fight. Logan does not share this conviction. He has lived too long, killed too many to believe in anything so simple, but he fights alongside the captain anyway, because fighting is what he does, because the alternative is to stop fighting and remember, and remembering is worse than any battle. They liberate prisoners from the facility. They destroy Hydra's research. They part ways with a handshake and a promise to meet again after the war. Logan forgets. The memory slips away like water through fingers, replaced by static and shadow. Years later, when he meets Captain America again, there will be no recognition. Only a vague sense of familiarity, a feeling that this man can be trusted, though he cannot say why. The third flash, an island, Madripoor, a lawless paradise in Southeast Asia, where criminals and kings drink at the same bars and blood flows as freely as money. Logan finds himself here in the late 1940s, drawn by rumours of work for a man with his particular skills. The city is a fever dream of neon and shadow, of beautiful women and ugly violence, of pleasures that numb and poisons that kill. He meets a woman named Seraph. She is small and delicate, with eyes that have seen too much and hands that have ended more lives than Logan can count. She runs an intelligence network that spans continents, trading in secrets and lies and the occasional assassination. She takes Logan as a lover, as an asset, as something approaching a friend. She teaches him the delicate art of information gathering, the careful dance of espionage that exists beneath the brutal surface of combat. Their relationship lasts years or months or perhaps only weeks. Time means nothing in Madripoor, where every night feels like the last night on Earth. When it ends, when Seraph sends him away with a kiss and a warning, Logan cannot remember why. He only knows that he loved her, in his way, and that loving her was not enough to make him stay. The fourth flash, cherry blossoms, Japan, the occupation years when American soldiers walked the streets of Tokyo like conquering gods and the ancient culture of the samurai bent, but did not break beneath the weight of defeat. Logan arrives with no clear purpose, drawn by something he cannot name, a pull toward this island nation that feels almost like memory. He finds Ogun. The man is old, impossibly old, his face a map of wrinkles and his eyes bright with a fire that age has not dimmed. He is a master of the sword, the last inheritor of a tradition stretching back centuries, and he recognizes something in the gaijin who appears at his dojo seeking training. "You have killed many men," Ogun says, the first words he speaks to Logan. "Yes." "You do not remember most of them." It is not a question. Logan does not answer. "I will teach you," Ogun continues, "not how to kill. You know this already, better than any student I have trained. I will teach you why. I will teach you the difference between slaughter and sacrifice. I will teach you the way of the warrior, which is not the way of the beast." The training lasts years. Logan learns the blade, the katana, the wakizashi, the tanto, with a facility that surprises even Ogun. His healing factor allows him to train beyond the point where normal students would collapse, to endure wounds that would end other men's martial careers. But more importantly, he learns discipline, control, the philosophy of Bushido, the way of the warrior, which holds that death is not an ending but a transition, and that how one dies matters more than how one lives. For a time, Logan finds something approaching peace. It does not last. The fifth flash, a woman in a garden. Her name is Itsu. She's pregnant with his child. They have married in a small ceremony witnessed only by the trees and the wind, and Logan has allowed himself to believe that perhaps this time will be different. Perhaps this time he can build something instead of destroying it. Perhaps this time love will be enough. He comes home to find her dead. The details are fragmented, corrupted, possibly false. Someone sent by an enemy, Romulus perhaps, an ancient mutant whose manipulations span centuries, though Logan will not learn this name for decades. A blade in the night, Itsu's body in the garden, her blood soaking into the earth, her unborn child cut from her womb and taken. Logan screams. The sound echoes through the mountains, carrying with it all the grief of a century, all the loss that has accumulated like scar tissue around his heart. He searches for the killers. He finds only shadows, only dead ends, only more questions without answers. The child survives. Logan does not know this. Will not know this for 50 years, until a man called Dakan appears with bone claws and burning hatred, seeking revenge for an abandonment that was never abandonment at all. Another tragedy. Another wound, another memory that fades into the static, erased by trauma or by tampering, leaving only the residue of grief without context. The sixth, flash, a cold room. Men in uniforms asking questions Logan cannot answer. The year is 1961, or perhaps 63, or perhaps the dates do not matter because he's been in rooms like this before and will be again. They want him to kill someone. A politician, perhaps, or a scientist, or simply an inconvenient witness to something that powerful people wish to remain hidden. He agrees. He always agrees. Fighting is what he does. Killing is what he is. The mission succeeds or fails. He does not remember which, but he remembers the cold, the endless bone-deep cold of operating in places where compassion is a liability and mercy is a weakness. He remembers becoming something less than human, something that follows orders without questioning them, something that kills without feeling it. Team X, the CIA, Department K. The names change, but the work remains the same. Logan is passed from handler to handler, organization to organization, each one using him as a weapon and discarding him when his usefulness ends. He works alongside other operatives, Sabretooth, whose face triggers rage he cannot explain, Maverick, whose loyalty is genuine if misguided, Silver Fox, whose name stirs memories of love and loss so painful he cannot examine them directly. They send him into the Soviet Union, into Cuba, into Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and a dozen other countries, where American interests demand unofficial intervention. He kills communists and capitalists, dictators and freedom fighters, anyone the mission requires. The blood accumulates, the memories fragment. The man called Logan becomes a ghost, a rumour, a shadow that governments deploy and deny in the same breath. And through it all, beneath the violence and the manipulation and the endless cycle of death, something waits, something patient, something hungry. The Weapon X program watches, it studies, it takes notes on the mutant with the healing factor, the man who cannot die, the perfect subject for an experiment that will change everything. Logan does not know he is being observed, does not know that his entire life has been a prelude, a preparation, a conditioning process designed to create the ideal candidate for what comes next. He knows only the fighting, only the killing, only the century of violence that has eroded his humanity down to bedrock and left nothing but the animal underneath. The tank is waiting. The facility had no name. It existed in the spaces between official records, funded by budgets that did not appear in congressional reports, staffed by scientists whose credentials had been erased from every university database. Buried deep in the Canadian wilderness, accessible only by helicopter or by roads that appeared on no map, it was a place designed to be forgotten, because what happened within its walls could never be acknowledged. The Weapon Plus program had been running for decades by the time Logan arrived. Its origins stretched back to the Second World War, to the same desperate science that had created Captain America, to the dream of engineering the perfect soldier. But where Project Rebirth had been fueled by hope and idealism, Weapon Plus was fueled by something darker. Its architects did not want heroes. They wanted weapons, living instruments of destruction that could be deployed, controlled, and, when necessary, disposed of. Each iteration built on the failures of the last. Weapon 1 through Weapon 9 had produced varying degrees of success and catastrophe, leaving behind a trail of dead test subjects and classified incident reports. But Weapon 10, the project that would come to be known simply as Weapon X, was different. Its designers had learned from their predecessors' mistakes. They knew exactly what they needed: a subject whose body could survive modifications that would kill any ordinary human, whose mind could be broken and rebuilt according to their specifications, whose natural abilities could be enhanced into something unprecedented. They needed a mutant. Specifically, they needed one with a healing factor. They had been watching Logan for years. The abduction happened on a night like any other. Logan was in the Canadian Rockies, living rough as he often did between assignments, trying to escape the static in his head and the blood on his hands. He had built a small fire in a clearing, was cooking a rabbit he had caught with his bare hands, was allowing himself a rare moment of something approaching peace. The tranquilizer dart hit him in the neck before he heard the helicopter. His healing factor burned through the sedative almost immediately, but by then there were more darts, a dozen of them, fired by operatives who knew exactly how much it took to bring him down. He fought. Of course he fought. But his limbs were heavy, his vision blurring, his claws emerging too slowly to matter. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was a man in a white coat holding a clipboard, smiling, with the satisfaction of a collector who has finally acquired a rare specimen. He woke in the facility. The room was white, sterile, windowless. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, shadowless glow. Logan was strapped to a table, not with leather or rope, but with metal bands thick enough to restrain a tank. He tested them once, twice, felt them give slightly under his strength, and then electricity surged through his body and he stopped testing. "The subject is awake," said a voice. "Female? Clinical. Vitals are elevated, but within acceptable parameters. Begin the preliminary assessment." The next several hours, or days, or weeks, time had no meaning in that room, were a blur of needles and electrodes and questions he could not answer. They measured everything: his bone density, his muscle composition, his neurological responses, his healing factor, which they tested by cutting him open and watching how long it took for the wounds to close. They were thorough in the way that scientists are thorough, detached in the way that men become detached when they have convinced themselves that their subjects are not truly human. 3 names emerged from the white-coated blur, 3 faces that Logan would remember even when everything else had been erased. Professor Thornton was the program's director, a bureaucrat in a lab coat, more concerned with budgets and timelines than with the ethics of what they were creating. He spoke of Logan as an investment, an asset, a resource to be developed and deployed. His eyes held no cruelty because cruelty requires recognition of suffering, and Thornton had long ago stopped seeing his subjects as beings capable of suffering. Dr. Abraham Cornelius was the chief scientist, a brilliant man, a visionary in his field, who had convinced himself that the atrocities he committed served a greater good. He spoke of Logan with something approaching reverence, marvelling at the healing factor, at the potential, at the unprecedented opportunity to push the boundaries of human enhancement. He was the true architect of what would come, the designer of the procedure that would transform a man into a weapon. Dr. Carol Hines was the recorder, a young woman whose job was to document everything, to ensure that the project's findings would survive even if the project itself did not. She looked at Logan with something the others lacked. Not kindness exactly. She was too complicit for kindness, but recognition. She saw him as a person, even as she helped destroy his personhood. Years later, the guilt would consume her, but that was years later, and this was now. "The preliminary assessment is complete," Cornelius announced, reviewing data on a screen Logan could not see. "The subject's healing factor exceeds our most optimistic projections. He is an ideal candidate for the bonding process." "How long until we can proceed?" Thornton asked. 48 hours to prepare the adamantium. Another 12 for surgical setup. The procedure itself will take approximately 6 hours, assuming the subject survives the first phase. "And if he doesn't?" Cornelius smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Then we will have learned valuable information for the next candidate. But I don't anticipate failure. This one is special." "Special!" The word echoed in Logan's mind as they wheeled him into the surgical theatre, as they stripped him naked and shaved his body and inserted ports into his flesh through which the adamantium would flow. He was special. He had always been special. and his specialness had brought him here, to this table, to this moment, to this horror that awaited him. The tank rose from the floor like a coffin standing upright, cylindrical, glass, filled with a pale green liquid that smelled of chemicals and death. Tubes snaked from its surface, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, each one designed to pierce his skin, to monitor his vitals, to deliver the adamantium, directly to his bones. Logan fought as they lifted him toward it, thrashing against restraints that would not break, screaming curses in languages he did not remember learning. It made no difference. They lowered him into the tank. The green liquid embraced him like a lover, like a grave, seeping into his mouth and nose and eyes until there was nothing but green, nothing but chemical burning, nothing but the tubes that invaded his body and the wires that pierced his skull. He could not breathe. He could not see. He could only wait, suspended in that emerald hell, for whatever came next. "Vital signs are stable," Hines reported, her voice muffled by the liquid surrounding him. "The subject is ready." "Begin the bonding process," Cornelius said. "Start with the extremities, hands first." The adamantium came. Logan had known pain before. He had been shot, stabbed, burned, beaten. He had fought in wars where agony was constant and death was a mercy denied. But nothing had prepared him for this. The metal entered his body as liquid fire, heated to temperatures that should have vaporized flesh on contact. His healing factor was the only thing keeping him alive, regenerating tissue faster than the adamantium could destroy it, but the pain remained. The pain was everything. It was the universe contracting to a single point of infinite suffering, to the sensation of his bones being coated in molten metal, of marrow being displaced by alloy, of his skeleton becoming something other than bone. They started with his hands. The adamantium flowed through the surgical ports, directed by precision instruments to coat each metacarpal, each phalanx, each tiny bone that made up the complex structure of human fingers. The claws came next. The bone protrusions that had always been part of him, that had first emerged on that terrible night at the Howlett estate. And Logan felt them transformed, felt them become something harder and sharper and infinitely more deadly. Then his wrists, his forearms, his elbows. The pain built in waves, each new bone adding to the crescendo until Logan was certain he would go mad, until he prayed for death even knowing that death would not come. He screamed into the liquid, producing only bubbles, only silence, only the endless green that had become his entire world. "Moving to the spine," Cornelius narrated, his voice distant but audible through the monitoring equipment. "This is the critical phase. If the subject's healing factor cannot compensate for the trauma, we will lose him." They did not lose him. The adamantium coated his vertebrae one by one, from the base of his skull to his tailbone, transforming his spine into an unbreakable column of metal and bone. The pain was beyond description now, beyond language, beyond thought. Logan existed only as sensation, as agony, as the raw animal awareness of a body being fundamentally altered against its will. His ribs came next, his pelvis, his femurs and tibias and fibulas. Every bone in his body, from the largest to the smallest, was systematically coated in the indestructible alloy. His skull was last, the final frontier, the seat of his consciousness, and when the adamantium reached it, when it surrounded his brain in a cage of metal, something in Logan's mind shattered. He forgot his name, he forgot everything. The procedure took not 6 hours, but closer to 12, and when it was done, the thing that floated in the tank bore no resemblance to the man who'd been lowered into it. 200 pounds of adamantium had been bonded to his skeleton. His healing factor had been pushed to its absolute limit and beyond, regenerating tissue that was destroyed and destroyed again in the process of accepting the metal. His mind had been wiped clean by pain, leaving only instinct, only rage, only the feral core that had always existed beneath the human surface. But Weapon Plus was not finished. The memory implantation began while Logan was still in the tank, while his brain was still raw and receptive from the trauma of the bonding. They fed him false memories through the wires in his skull. Memories of missions he had never completed, of kills he had never made, of loyalties that had never existed. They layered fiction over truth until the two became indistinguishable, until Logan could not have said what was real even if he had possessed the capacity for speech. They programmed him with trigger words, phrases that would override his will, that would transform him from a thinking being into a pure instrument of destruction. They conditioned him to respond to commands, to follow orders, to kill on demand without hesitation or remorse. And they tested him. Other subjects existed in the facility, other mutants, other experiments, other weapons in various stages of development. They put Logan in rooms with these subjects and watched what happened. The results exceeded their expectations. He killed with an efficiency that bordered on artistry, his new adamantium claws carving through flesh and bone as easily as they carved through steel. He showed no mercy. He showed no recognition. He showed nothing but the pure, purposeless violence of a creature that had been stripped of everything except the capacity for harm. Weapon X is operational, Cornelius declared, reviewing footage of the latest test. The subject has exceeded all parameters. He is ready for deployment. And the conditioning? Thornton asked. Will it hold? Cornelius hesitated. This was the question that haunted him, the variable that could not be fully controlled. The man they had captured, Logan, as he had called himself, had proven remarkably resistant to programming. His healing factor affected his brain as well as his body, constantly regenerating neural pathways, constantly fighting against the alterations they had made. The conditioning would hold, probably, but if it failed... The conditioning will hold, Cornelius said, because any other answer was unacceptable. Weapon X is ours. In the tank, suspended in green liquid, the thing that had once been a man dreamed of blood and snow, and a woman with red hair calling a name he could no longer remember. The weapon was ready. The man was gone. The programming held for 17 days. 17 days of tests and trials and missions conducted within the facility's walls. 17 days of Weapon X performing exactly as designed, a perfect instrument of destruction responding to trigger words and handler commands with mechanical precision. Cornelius was triumphant. Thornton was already drafting deployment proposals. The project was a success beyond their most ambitious projections. On the 18th day, something broke. It happened during a routine conditioning session. Logan, though he no longer answered to that name, no longer answered to any name, was strapped to a chair while technicians reinforced his programming, layering new commands over old, ensuring that the weapon remained compliant. The procedure had been performed dozens of times without incident. There was no reason to expect this time would be different. But the healing factor had been working in ways the scientists did not understand, repairing not just tissue but neural pathways, regenerating not just flesh but memory. Deep in the recesses of Logan's shattered mind, fragments were reassembling themselves, not into coherent thought, not into identity, but into something older and more primal, the animal that had always lived beneath the human surface, the beast that Weapon Plus had tried to harness but could never truly control. The technician leaned close to adjust a sensor on Logan's skull. The claws came out. 3 blades of adamantium, 18 inches long, erupted through the man's chest before anyone in the room could react. Blood sprayed across monitoring equipment. Alarms began to wail, and Weapon X, the thing that had been Logan, the thing that was now something else, entirely, tore free of its restraints with strength that should have been impossible even for an adamantium-enhanced mutant. What followed was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Logan moved through the facility like a force of nature, like a wildfire consuming everything in its path. Guards opened fire and he did not slow, bullets tearing through flesh that healed before they could fall to the ground. Scientists ran and he caught them, claws opening throats and spilling intestines across sterile white floors. He did not think. He did not plan. He simply killed, driven by a rage so pure and so ancient that it transcended anything the programming had attempted to suppress. Cornelius died in his laboratory, still clutching the datapad that contained years of research. Thornton died in the hallway outside his office, trying to reach a panic room that would not have saved him anyway. Hines survived only because she hid, crouched in a supply closet, hands pressed over her mouth, listening to the screams of her colleagues as the weapon they had created turned on its creators. The facility's self-destruct protocols activated automatically when the security breach reached critical levels. Explosions rippled through underground corridors, collapsing tunnels and sealing exits. But Logan did not need exits. His claws carved through reinforced steel like paper, through concrete like clay, through everything that stood between him and the outside world. He emerged into the Canadian winter naked and covered in blood. The cold hit him like a physical blow, 40 degrees below zero, wind howling across a landscape of snow and stone and endless forest. Any normal man would have died within minutes. Logan's healing factor kept him alive, burning calories at an impossible rate, regenerating frostbitten tissue faster than the cold could destroy it. But survival was not living, and the thing that stumbled away from the burning facility was not truly alive. He ran, through forests, where the snow came up to his waist, through mountain passes where the wind cut like knives, through a wilderness so vast and empty that a man could disappear into it forever and leave no trace of his passing. He ran until the facility was a distant glow on the horizon, until the sounds of secondary explosions faded into silence, until there was nothing in the world but the white of the snow and the red of his own blood and the endless driving need to be somewhere else. Days passed, weeks, perhaps months. Time had no meaning for a creature operating on pure instinct. Logan did not think in words anymore. The programming had stripped language from him, and the escape had stripped everything else. He existed as sensation, as hunger, as the imperative to hunt and kill and survive. He caught rabbits with his bare hands and ate them raw, blood steaming in the frozen air. He slept in caves and hollow logs, curled into a ball against the cold, waking at the slightest sound with claws, extended and teeth bared. The wilderness became his world. The trees were his boundaries. The animals were his competition and his prey. He forgot that he had ever been anything other than this, a predator among predators, surviving because survival was all that remained. He was becoming something less than human, and something more than animal. The Hudsons found him in early spring. James MacDonald. Hudson was a scientist working for the Canadian government, developing advanced technology for a program called Department H. His wife, Heather, was a woman of remarkable compassion and even more remarkable courage. They had come to the wilderness on a camping trip, seeking respite from the pressures of classified work and political manoeuvring. What they found was a monster. Heather saw him first, a shape in the tree line watching their camp with eyes that glowed in the firelight. She thought it was a bear at first, or perhaps a wolf. Then it stepped into the clearing and she saw that it walked on two legs, that it was shaped like a man, that it was covered in blood and filth and matted hair, and that its hands ended in claws of gleaming metal. She should have run. Any sane person would have run. Instead, she spoke to it. "It's all right," she said, her voice steady despite the terror that gripped her heart. "We're not going to hurt you. Are you hungry? We have food." The creature, Logan, tilted its head, studying her with an intensity that bordered on predatory. Its nostrils flared, scenting the air, cataloguing threats and opportunities. The claws remained extended, ready to strike at the slightest provocation. James reached for the rifle he had brought for protection. Heather stopped him with a gesture. "Look at him," she whispered. "Really look. That's not an animal. That's a man. Someone did this to him." She approached slowly, hands raised to show she meant no harm. Logan tensed, every muscle coiling for violence, but something in her voice, some frequency, of kindness that his shattered mind still recognized, held him in place. She stopped an arm's length away, close enough that his claws could have opened her throat in a heartbeat. "My name is Heather," she said. "What's yours?" For a long moment nothing happened. The wind howled. The fire crackled. Two species regarded each other across a gulf that should have been unbridgeable. Then Logan spoke. The word came out rough, broken, barely recognizable as language. But it was a word nonetheless. The first word he had spoken since the tank. "Don't know." The rehabilitation took months. The Hudsons brought him back to civilization slowly, carefully, treating him less like a patient and more like a wild animal being gradually introduced to captivity. They gave him clothes, which he tore off. They gave him cooked food, which he refused to eat until starvation overrode instinct. They spoke to him constantly, filling the silence with words, rebuilding his understanding of language one. Syllable at a time, Heather was the key. Her patience seemed infinite, her compassion bottomless. She sat with Logan for hours, reading to him from books he could not understand, describing a world he could barely remember. She did not flinch when he snarled at her. She did not retreat when his claws emerged in moments of panic. She simply waited, steady and calm, until the danger passed and the man beneath the animal resurfaced. James Hudson's motives were less pure. He recognized what Logan was: a mutant, enhanced by technology he did not fully understand but desperately wanted to study. The claws, the healing factor, the adamantium skeleton, these were assets beyond anything Department H had managed to develop. If Logan could be recruited, controlled, directed toward appropriate targets, he would be the centerpiece of Canada's superhuman defense program. But first, he had to become human again. The process was agonizing. Memories surfaced in fragments, each one bringing fresh trauma. The tank, the pain, the endless parade of faces belonging to men he had killed. Logan would wake screaming from nightmares he could not describe. Claws buried in the walls of the Hudson's home, tears streaming down a face that had forgotten how to cry. But slowly, painfully, he began to remember. Not everything. The false memories implanted by Weapon X remained tangled with the true ones, creating a labyrinth of identity he would spend decades trying to navigate. But enough. Enough to know that he had been a man once. Enough to know that he wanted to be a man again. "I'm not a weapon," he said one night, sitting on the Hudson's porch staring at the stars. "No," Heather agreed, "you're not." James said nothing. In his mind, he was already drafting proposals for Department H, outlining how Weapon X, how Logan, could be deployed in service to his country. The rage still simmered beneath the surface. The animal still prowled the boundaries of Logan's consciousness, waiting. For weakness, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim control. He was not healed, he would never be healed. But he was functional, and for now, that was enough. When James Hudson finally made his offer, join Department H, use his abilities to protect Canada, become something more than a monster, Logan accepted. Not because he believed in the mission, not because he trusted the government that had created him, because he needed purpose, because the alternative was to drift, to wander, to eventually lose himself in the wilderness again and never return, because even a weapon wants to believe it can be something more. The uniform felt wrong, yellow and blue, skin-tight, designed by bureaucrats who had never thrown a punch in their lives. Logan stood in front of a mirror in the Department H facility, staring at a reflection he barely recognized. The wild man of the Canadian wilderness was gone, replaced by something that looked almost civilized, hair trimmed, beard shaved, eyes still, carrying the weight of 100 forgotten years but no longer burning with uncontrolled rage. He looked like a superhero. The thought made him want to laugh, or vomit, possibly both. "It's a good look," James Hudson said, standing in the doorway with the satisfied expression of a man whose investment was finally paying dividends. "The public needs symbols, something to rally behind. You could be that symbol, Logan." "I'm not a symbol. I'm a man with knives in his hands." "You're both. That's the point." Department H was the Canadian government's answer to a world increasingly populated by beings of extraordinary power. Mutants, enhanced humans, aliens, entities that defied classification. While the Americans had their Avengers and their Fantastic Four, Canada had been left vulnerable, dependent on allies whose priorities did not always align with Canadian interests. James Hudson intended to change that. His vision was Alpha Flight, a team of superhuman operatives drawn from Canada's own population, trained and equipped to handle threats that conventional forces could not address. He had spent years recruiting candidates, identifying mutants and other powered individuals who might serve, assembling the pieces of a puzzle that would finally come together under his leadership. Logan was the final piece, the most dangerous piece, the piece that made the rest of them look like amateurs. The team assembled over the following months. Guardian, James Hudson himself, wearing a battlesuit of his own design that allowed him to fly and project powerful energy blasts. Sasquatch, Walter Lankowski, a physicist whose experiments had transformed him into a massive orange-furred creature of incredible strength. Northstar and Aurora, Jean-Paul and Jean-Marie Bobier, twin siblings who could fly at superhuman speeds and generate blinding light when in physical contact. Shaman, Michael Youngman, a physician and sorcerer who had inherited the mystical traditions of his Sarsi ancestors. Snowbird, Neria, a demigoddess born of an Inuit deity and a human woman, capable of transforming into any creature native to Canada. Puck, Eugene Judd, a diminutive adventurer whose compressed body granted him superhuman strength and agility. They were an unlikely group. Scientists and sorcerers, siblings and strangers, humans and beings that defied human classification. They had nothing in common except their powers and their nationality. And, eventually, their loyalty to each other. Logan did not fit. He trained with them, fought alongside them, followed orders when orders made sense. But he remained apart, a shadow at the edge of every gathering, a presence that made even his teammates uncomfortable. They knew what he was. They had read the classified files, seen the footage of what he could do, understood that the man in the yellow and blue costume was not like them. They were heroes. He was something else. The Wendigo mission changed everything. The creature had been terrorizing northern Quebec for weeks, a massive, white-furred beast that had once been human, transformed by an ancient curse into a cannibal monster of supernatural power. Local authorities were helpless. The military had lost an entire squad trying to contain it. Department H was called in as a last resort. Alpha Flight deployed expecting a difficult fight. They got a war. The Wendigo was stronger than their intelligence had suggested, faster, more cunning. It tore through the team's initial assault like they were children, sending Sasquatch flying with a single blow, nearly killing Aurora before Northstar could pull her to safety. Guardian's energy blasts seemed only to enrage it. Shaman's magic could slow it, but not stop it. For the first time since the team's formation, they faced the very real possibility of failure. Then Logan stepped forward. The fight that followed would become legend within Department H. Footage classified at the highest levels, shown only to those who needed to understand exactly what Weapon X was capable of. Logan did not fight like a hero. He fought like an animal, matching the Wendigo's savagery with his own, trading blows that would have killed any normal man, his healing factor regenerating damage faster than the creature could inflict it. His claws opened wounds that even the Wendigo's supernatural constitution could not ignore. His refusal to retreat, to slow, to show any weakness, eventually wore the beast down. When it was over, the Wendigo lay unconscious in the snow, and Logan stood over it, covered in blood, both his own and the creature's, breathing hard but unbroken. His teammates looked at him differently after that. Not with friendship. Friendship was still too much to ask, but with respect. They understood now why Department H had fought so hard to recruit him. They understood what he brought to the team that none of them could provide. He was the one they sent in when heroes weren't enough, the Hulk. Mission came next. The Green Giant had crossed into Canadian territory during one of his rampages, leaving a trail of destruction that stretched from Montana to British Columbia. The Americans had requested that Canada stand down, allow their own forces to handle the situation. Department H refused. This was Canadian soil, Canadian jurisdiction, Canadian responsibility. They sent Logan alone. The battle took place in the Rocky Mountains, far from civilian populations, where the collateral damage would be measured in destroyed forests rather than destroyed lives. It was the first time the Wolverine, as the press had begun calling him, faced an opponent whose power truly exceeded his own. The Hulk was stronger, larger, more durable, but Logan was faster, more skilled, and absolutely unwilling to quit. They fought for hours. Claws against fists, healing factor against gamma-powered regeneration, rage against rage. Neither could truly defeat the other, but Logan proved something that Day proved it to the Hulk, to the watching world, to himself. He could stand against the strongest there was. He could survive what should have been unsurvivable. He was not merely a weapon to be deployed and discarded. He was the Wolverine. The mission made international headlines. Footage of the battle, grainy, distant, captured by military satellites, appeared on news broadcasts around the world. A new hero had arrived on the global stage, one whose ferocity and resilience captured the public imagination in ways that Department H had never anticipated. But Logan felt no triumph, only exhaustion, only the familiar emptiness that followed violence, the hollow space where satisfaction should have been. He was still a weapon, a better dressed weapon, a more famous weapon, but a weapon nonetheless. Department H gave him targets, and he destroyed them. The government pointed him at threats, and he eliminated them. The cycle that had defined his existence since Weapon X continued, dressed in different colors but fundamentally unchanged. He needed something more. something that the uniforms and the missions and the government handlers could not provide. He needed a purpose beyond destruction. He needed a family. Across the border, in a mansion in Westchester, New York, a man in a wheelchair was assembling something extraordinary. A school for mutants. A team dedicated not to government interests, but to a dream of coexistence, of understanding, of a world where those born different could find acceptance. His name was Charles Xavier, and he had been watching the Wolverine very carefully. The invitation, when it came, would change everything. The mansion appeared through the trees like something from a dream. 3 stories of red brick and white columns, surrounded by manicured lawns that seemed to stretch forever, windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. It was the kind of place that belonged to old money and older traditions, to families whose names appeared in history books and whose influence shaped nations. It was the last place on earth Logan expected to find himself, and yet here he was, standing at the gates of Xavier's school for gifted youngsters, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. Charles Xavier had made contact 3 weeks earlier, reaching out through channels that should have been secure, demonstrating a knowledge of Logan's history that bordered on disturbing. The telepath knew about Weapon X. He knew about the adamantium, the memory loss, the century of violence that preceded the tank. He knew things that Logan himself had forgotten, fragments of a past that even the healing factor could not fully restore. More importantly, he knew what Logan needed. Not another government handler, not another set of orders to follow, but a place where his abilities could serve something greater than national interests or bureaucratic agendas. A purpose that transcended destruction. "I am building a family," Xavier had said, his voice resonating directly in Logan's mind during their first conversation. Not soldiers, not weapons. A family of mutants who will show the world what we can be when we work together. I believe you could be part of that family, Logan, if you choose to be. Department H had not wanted to let him go. James Hudson had argued, threatened, appealed to Logan's sense of obligation. Canada needed him. Alpha Flight needed him. He was abandoning his country when his country needed him most. Logan had listened to all of it. Then he had walked out. He was done being owned. The gates opened as he approached, responding to some unseen signal. He walked up the long driveway, past gardens that showed signs of a recent battle. Scorched earth here, overturned statuary there, the subtle evidence of powers that exceeded anything the landscaping could contain. The mansion itself seemed untouched, serene, radiating a peace that felt almost aggressive in its intensity. The front door opened before he could knock. A woman stood in the doorway, tall, dark-skinned, with white hair that cascaded over her shoulders like a waterfall of snow. Her eyes were the blue of a clear sky, and when she looked at Logan, he felt the unmistakable pressure of power barely contained. The air around her seemed to shimmer, carrying the ozone scent of an approaching storm. "You must be Logan," she said. Her voice carried the lilting accent of Africa, of places far removed from Canadian snow and American wealth. "The professor has been expecting you. I am Aurora Monroe. They call me Storm." "They call me a lot of things," Logan replied. "Most of them aren't polite." Storm smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes and transformed her face from regal to radiant. "Then you will fit in well here. We are all called things that are not polite. That is rather the point." The team that Xavier had assembled was unlike anything Logan had encountered. They gathered in the mansion's war room, a space that belied the school's peaceful exterior, filled with advanced technology and tactical displays that would have made Department H weep with envy. Logan studied them as Xavier made introductions, cataloguing threats and assets with the instincts of a lifelong survivor. Storm he had already met. Her power over weather made her potentially the most dangerous person in the room, a walking natural disaster capable of levelling cities if she chose. But her eyes held compassion rather than cruelty, and Logan found himself trusting her almost immediately. Nightcrawler was next. Kurt Wagner, a German mutant whose appearance was as shocking as his demeanour was gentle. Blue fur covered his entire body. Yellow eyes gleamed from a face that seemed designed to inspire terror. His hands bore only 3 fingers each, and a prehensile tail swayed behind him as he moved. He should have been monstrous. Instead, he greeted Logan with a smile that radiated genuine warmth and an accent thick with Bavarian charm. Welcome, my friend. The Professor speaks highly of you. I look forward to fighting alongside someone who shares my appreciation for, how do you say, the direct approach. Klosser stood silent in the corner, a young Russian whose mutation allowed him to transform his body into organic steel. Peter Rasputin was barely more than a boy, his eyes carrying an innocence that seemed impossible, given the violence his powers implied. He nodded at Logan with shy respect, clearly uncertain how to interact with the feral Canadian whose reputation had preceded him. Banshee was Irish, a former Interpol agent whose sonic scream could shatter steel and allow him to fly. Sean Cassidy had the weathered look of a man who had seen too much of the world's darkness and was desperately seeking light. He and Logan exchanged the silent acknowledgement of soldiers recognizing each other. Thunderbird was Apache, a massive warrior named John Proudstar whose strength and speed were matched only by his barely contained anger. He looked at Logan with something approaching hostility, seeing perhaps a rival for the role of Team Savage. There would be friction there, Logan knew. Friction and possibly violence. Sunfire stood apart from the others, radiating disdain that bordered on contempt. Shiro Yoshida was Japanese, his powers allowing him to generate and project superheated plasma. He had agreed to join the mission but made no secret of his belief that he was superior to his teammates. Logan recognized the arrogance of old money and older prejudices, the same arrogance he had seen in the Howlets a lifetime ago. And then there was Cyclops. Scott Summers entered the room like a man who owned it, moving with military precision to take his place at Xavier's side. His eyes were hidden behind a visor of ruby quartz, necessary to contain the devastating optic blasts that were his mutation's blessing and curse. He was young, barely 20 Logan estimated, but carried, himself with the authority of someone much older. Their eyes met. Or rather, Logan's eyes met the red glare of Scott's visor, and something immediate and electric passed between them. Recognition. Challenge. The instantaneous assessment of two predators encountering each other in unfamiliar territory. "You're the Wolverine," Scott said. Not a question. "You're the Boy Scout," Logan replied. Not a compliment. Xavier intervened before the tension could escalate further. "Scott leads our field operations. Logan, you will be joining the team as a specialist. Your unique abilities make you invaluable for situations that require a more direct approach. I trust you can work together despite your differences." Neither man responded. Neither needed to. The battle lines were already drawn. The mission briefing that followed was unlike anything Logan had experienced in his years of government service. The original X-Men, the team Xavier had founded years earlier, had been captured by an entity called Krakoa. The living island, Xavier called it, a mutant landmass in the Pacific that fed on the energies of those it trapped. Cyclops had barely escaped to report the disaster. The rest of his team, Marvel Girl, Iceman, Angel, Havoc, Polaris, remained imprisoned, their life forces being slowly drained to feed the island's hunger. This new team, hastily assembled from mutants across the globe, was their only hope for rescue. "The island's defences are formidable," Xavier explained, his voice grave. "It will attempt to capture you as it captured the others. You must work together, trust each other, if any of you are to survive." Trust. The word echoed in Logan's mind as they boarded the Blackbird, Xavier's advanced stealth jet, and hurtled toward the Pacific. He did not trust these people. He barely knew them. And yet here he was, flying into battle alongside them, his life dependent on their abilities and their judgment. The battle for Krakoa was chaos. The island fought back with everything it had: animated stone, grasping vegetation, psychic assaults that threatened to overwhelm even the strongest minds. Logan fought through it all, claws flashing, healing factor burning, the animal within finally unleashed in service to something greater than mere survival. He saw storms summon lightning that scorched the living earth. He saw Colossus tear through stone barriers that would have stopped a tank. He saw Nightcrawler teleport through enemy defences with precision and grace. He saw Cyclops coordinate the assault with tactical brilliance that Logan grudgingly respected. And when it was over, when Krakoa lay dormant and the original X-Men stood free, Logan understood something that he had not expected to understand. These people were not soldiers. They were not weapons. They were exactly what Xavier had promised. A family, bound not by blood but by shared struggle, by the dream of a world where mutants could live without fear. A family that had room for him, if he chose to stay. The mansion became his home in the weeks that followed, though he never quite stopped feeling like an intruder. He trained in the Danger Room, the mansion's holographic combat simulator, pushing himself and his teammates to their limits. He clashed with Cyclops over tactics and philosophy, their arguments becoming legendary among the students who watched from the sidelines. He formed an unlikely friendship with Nightcrawler, the two of them spending long nights discussing faith and redemption over bottles of German beer. And he fell in love with Jean Grey. It happened slowly, then all at once. A growing awareness of the red-haired telepath who moved through the mansion like light through crystal. She was Scott's girlfriend, utterly devoted to the team leader, completely unavailable. But Logan's heart did not care about availability. His heart knew only that when Jean Grey entered a room, the world seemed to shift on its axis. He never spoke of it, never acted on it. He simply carried the weight of forbidden longing alongside all the other weights he bore, adding one more shadow to the darkness within. The X-Men gave him purpose. They gave him belonging. They gave him something that approached hope, but they could not give him peace. That, he was beginning to understand, might be beyond any family's power to provide. She burned like a star given human form. Logan had seen many things in his long and fractured life. Horrors that would break ordinary minds, wonders that defied explanation, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of Jean Grey ascending. The Phoenix Force had chosen her during a desperate mission in space, had merged with her consciousness to save her dying body, and now that cosmic entity lived within her like fire lives within a furnace. She was still Jean, still the woman whose smile made his heart ache, but she was also something more, something vast and terrifying and beautiful beyond mortal comprehension. He watched her from a distance, as he always did. Watched the way the air seemed to shimmer around her when her emotions ran high. Watched the way her eyes occasionally flickered with flames that belonged to no earthly source. Watched and wanted and said nothing. She belonged to Scott. She had always belonged to Scott, from the moment the two of them had met as teenagers in Xavier's first class of students. Their love was the foundation upon which the X-Men had been built, pure, idealistic, unshakable. Logan had no right to interfere with that, no right to burden Jean with feelings she had never asked for and could never return. But the heart does not listen to reason. The heart wants what it wants, and Logan's heart wanted Jean Grey with an intensity that frightened him. The trouble began with the Hellfire Club. They called themselves an elite social organization, a gathering of the wealthy and powerful who met in exclusive circles to discuss matters of mutual interest. In truth, they were something far more sinister, a cabal of mutants and humans who sought to control the world from the shadows, manipulating governments and economies to serve their own ends. Their inner circle was led by Sebastian Shaw, a mutant whose body absorbed kinetic energy and converted it to strength, making him more powerful with every blow he received. Shaw had become aware of the Phoenix Force. More importantly, he had become aware of Jean Grey, the vessel that contained it. Such power, he reasoned, should not be wasted on Xavier's naive dream of coexistence. Such power should be controlled, directed, wielded by those with the vision to use it properly. The weapon he chose was Mastermind. Jason Wingard was an illusionist of extraordinary ability, capable of creating psychic constructs so vivid that victims could not distinguish them from reality. Under Shaw's direction, he began a subtle campaign of mental manipulation, infiltrating Jean's dreams, implanting false memories, gradually seducing her consciousness away from everything she believed and everyone she loved. Jean began to change. The shifts were subtle at first, a sharpness in her voice, a coldness in her eyes, moments of cruelty that seemed utterly unlike the woman Logan knew. She became distant from Scott, dismissive of Xavier's teachings, increasingly fascinated by the darker aspects of her power. The Phoenix Force, which had once manifested as golden light and life-giving warmth, began to flicker with shadows that suggested something far more dangerous. Logan sensed the wrongness before anyone else. His instincts, honed by a century of survival, screamed that something was hunting Jean, corrupting her, turning her into something she was never meant to become. He tried to warn Scott, tried to convince Xavier to intervene, but his concerns were dismissed as jealousy, as the paranoia of a man whose feelings for Jean compromised his judgment. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps he was too close to see clearly. But that did not make him wrong. The Hellfire Club's trap was sprung at a gala in New York. The X-Men had been invited as guests, or so they believed. In truth, they were walking into an ambush, surrounded by enemies who had spent months preparing for this moment. Shaw's inner circle struck with overwhelming force, targeting the team's most powerful members first, isolating them, neutralizing them one by one. Logan fought like a demon, his claws carved through mercenaries and mutant enforcers alike, leaving a trail of bodies that would haunt the club's halls for years to come. But even he could not fight an entire army alone, and when the battle finally ended, he found himself imprisoned alongside his teammates, powerless to prevent what came next. Jean stood before them in the black corset and cape of the Hellfire Club's Black Queen. Mastermind's illusions had completed their work. The woman Logan loved was gone, replaced by a creature of cruelty and appetite who looked upon her former friends with contempt. She was Shaw's now, his weapon, his queen, and she would help him reshape the world according to his vision. Or so he believed. The Phoenix Force is not easily controlled. Jean's mind, even corrupted by Mastermind's manipulations, retained some fragment of its true self. When Shaw attempted to command her, when he treated her as a possession rather than a partner, something ancient and terrible awakened within her consciousness. The Phoenix rejected the cage that had been built around it. The Phoenix wanted freedom. Mastermind died first, not physically, but psychically, his mind shattered by a telepathic backlash that left him catatonic. The inner circle scattered as Jean rose into the air, her body wreathed in flames that were no longer golden but deep, corrupt crimson. She was not the Black Queen anymore. She was something worse. She was Dark Phoenix. The X-Men escaped in the chaos that followed, but escape meant nothing when the threat was one of their own. Jean, Dark Phoenix, ascended into space, her hunger growing with every moment, her power expanding beyond any limit that should have applied to a mortal mind. She needed energy to sustain her new form. She needed to feed. She consumed a star. The act took only moments. Dark Phoenix plunged into the heart of a sun in a distant galaxy, absorbing its nuclear fire, extinguishing a light that had burned for billions of years. The star's death was not a quiet thing. Its planets, including one that harbored 5 billion sentient beings, were annihilated in the supernova that followed. 5 billion lives, gone in an instant, murdered by the woman Logan loved. The Shi'ar Empire took notice. They were an ancient civilization that spanned galaxies, ruled by an empress named Lilandra, who happened to share a telepathic bond with Charles Xavier. She had watched the Phoenix Force with growing concern since its emergence on Earth. Now, with billions of her subjects dead, concern had transformed into something far more dangerous. Lilandra demanded justice. The Phoenix, Jean Grey, must be destroyed before she could threaten the universe again. Xavier pleaded for mercy, for the chance to help Jean regain control, but the Empress was unmoved. The creature that had consumed a star could not be allowed to exist. The risk was too great. Xavier invoked an ancient Shi'ar law, trial by combat. The X-Men would fight for Jean's life against the Imperial Guard, the Shi'ar's mightiest warriors. If they won, Jean would be spared. If they lost, she would be executed immediately. The battle took place on the blue area of the moon, in the ruins of an ancient civilization that had died long before humanity learned to walk upright. The X-Men stood against impossible odds, a handful of mutants facing the elite forces of a galactic empire. But they fought with everything they had. Logan was magnificent. He moved through the Imperial Guard like a force of nature, claws, flashing healing factor, burning, refusing to fall no matter how much damage he sustained. He fought for Jean. He fought for the woman he loved, the woman who had never loved him back, the woman who might already be beyond saving. He would have died for her without hesitation. He nearly did multiple times before his healing factor dragged him back from the brink. But it was not enough. The X-Men fell, one by one, overwhelmed by superior numbers and superior firepower, and as the battle reached its climax as defeat seemed inevitable, something unexpected happened. Jean Grey woke up, not Dark Phoenix. Jean, the real Jean, the woman who had been buried beneath layers of corruption and cosmic hunger, fighting her way back to the surface through sheer force of will. She looked at the destruction around her, at her friends bleeding and broken, at the empire that wanted her dead, at the memory of 5 billion souls screaming as their world burned, and she understood what had to be done. She could not control the Phoenix. No one could. And as long as she lived, the hunger would return, the darkness would spread, and more stars would die to feed her endless appetite. There was only one way to ensure it never happened again. Logan saw her move toward the ancient weapon, a Kree artifact left behind by a civilization long extinct. He understood, in that terrible moment, what she intended to do. He screamed her name. He ran toward her faster than he had ever run, desperate to stop her, to find another way, to save the woman he loved from the fate she had chosen. He was too late. Jean Grey triggered the weapon. The energy beam struck her full in the chest, and for one eternal instant she was outlined in golden fire. Not the corrupt crimson of Dark Phoenix, but the pure, radiant gold of the entity that had first chosen her. She turned to look at Scott, at the man she'd loved since childhood, and her lips formed words that Logan could not hear. Then she was gone. The Phoenix Force departed with her, leaving behind only ashen memory and the echo of a scream that might have been Scott's, or might have been Logan's own. He did not weep. He could not. The grief was too vast for tears, too deep for any expression that human biology could provide. He simply stood in the lunar dust staring at the place where Jean had been, feeling something inside himself die alongside her. Scott collapsed. Xavier bowed his head. The Shi'ar withdrew, their justice satisfied, their empire safe from the threat that had consumed 5 billion of their people. And Logan learned once again the lesson that his long life had taught him so many times before. Everyone he loved would die. Everyone he allowed himself to care for would be taken from him by violence or tragedy, or the simple cruelty of a universe that did not care about the hopes of mortal beings. Jean Grey was dead. The woman he had loved in silence, worshipped from a distance, would have died, for without hesitation she was gone, and the pain of her loss would never fully heal. The Phoenix would return. He did not know this yet, but he would learn. Death, for Jean Grey, was never permanent. She would rise again from the ashes, again and again, each resurrection bringing new complications and new heartbreak. But that was the future. In this moment, standing on the moon with ash settling on his shoulders, Logan knew only grief, and the terrible certainty that he would feel this way again. The plane touched down in Tokyo as the cherry blossoms fell. Logan watched them through the window, countless pink petals drifting on the wind, carpeting the streets in a temporary beauty that would vanish within days. There was a word for this in Japanese, he remembered. Mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, the melancholy that comes from understanding that all beautiful things must end. He had come to Japan seeking peace, seeking escape from the mansion that now echoed with Jean's absence, from teammates who looked at him with concern he did not want, from a grief that threatened to consume him if he remained still long enough to feel it fully. Japan had always called to him, ever since those fragmented years with Ogun, those half-remembered lessons in the way of the sword. Perhaps here, in a land that understood the beauty of transience, he could find something approaching acceptance. He found Mariko instead. The Ashida clan was one of Japan's oldest noble families, their lineage stretching back centuries to the time of the shoguns. Their wealth was immense, their influence pervasive, their reputation shadowed by whispers of connections to the Yakuza that no one dared speak aloud. Lord Shingen Yashida ruled this empire with an iron fist, maintaining the facade of legitimacy while drowning in the blood of those who opposed him. His daughter was nothing like him. Logan encountered Mariko at a formal reception in Kyoto, one of those elaborate social functions where appearances mattered more than truth, and every smile concealed a dagger. She stood apart from the crowd, radiating a quiet dignity that drew his eye immediately. Her kimono was traditional, immaculate, the colours of autumn leaves against a twilight sky. Her face was a study in controlled serenity, betraying nothing of the turmoil that surely raged beneath the surface. Because Mariko Yashida was not at this reception by choice. She was there because her father demanded it, because her duty as a daughter of the clan required her presence, because refusal was not an option for women in her position. She was, in the most elegant sense, a prisoner. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or the instinctive connection of two souls who understood suffering. Logan approached without thinking, drawn to her by forces he could not name. When he spoke, his Japanese was rough but functional, learned decades ago and never quite forgotten. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said. Mariko's composure flickered, the faintest hint of a smile disturbing her carefully maintained mask. Is it so obvious? Only to someone who feels the same way. They talked for hours, not about politics or business or any of the subjects that dominated such gatherings, but about poetry and philosophy, and the small beauties that made life bearable. Mariko spoke of her love for calligraphy, for the meditative peace of brush and ink transforming blank paper into meaning. Logan spoke of the wilderness, of forests and mountains and the simple honesty of nature. They discovered common ground in unexpected places, building bridges across cultural divides that should have been insurmountable. By the time the reception ended, Logan was lost. Not the desperate, doomed longing he had felt for Jean. That had been worship from afar, love without hope. This was different. Mariko saw him, truly saw him, not as a weapon or an animal or a monster to be feared, but as a man carrying wounds that no healing factor could touch. And she accepted him anyway. The courtship that followed defied every convention of Japanese society. Logan was gaijin, a foreigner, a barbarian with claws in his hands and violence in his past. Mariko was the daughter of a crime lord, promised in an arranged marriage to a Yakuza underboss who would secure her father's business interests. Their love was impossible, forbidden, destined for tragedy from its first flowering. They pursued it anyway, stolen moments in temple gardens, watching koi drift through ancient ponds, long walks through Kyoto's narrow streets, discovering shrines hidden among the modern buildings. Conversations that stretched into dawn, Mariko teaching Logan the nuances of her language and culture, while he shared the burden of memories that no one else could understand. For the first time since Jean's death, Logan allowed himself to hope. Lord Shingen was not pleased. He had tolerated the gaijin's presence initially, viewing Logan as an amusing distraction for his daughter, a passing fancy that would burn itself out. But as the relationship deepened, as it became clear that Mariko's feelings were genuine and reciprocated, tolerance transformed into cold fury. Shingen challenged Logan to a duel. The official pretext was honor. Logan had insulted the Yoshida clan by pursuing its heir without permission, had violated sacred traditions of courtship and propriety. The true reason was simpler. Shingen wanted the foreigner dead, and he was confident in his own ability to make it happen. They met in the dojo of the Yoshida estate, surrounded by clan retainers who expected to witness a slaughter. Shingen was a master swordsman, trained since childhood in arts that had been refined over centuries. His blade was an ancestral katana, folded steel that had tasted blood in wars long forgotten. He moved with the grace of a man who had killed many times and expected to kill many more. Logan came with only his claws. The fight was brutal and beautiful, a clash of philosophies as much as techniques. Shingen fought with the cold precision of a man who viewed murder as business, each strike calculated for maximum efficiency. Logan fought with the controlled fury of an animal that had learned to channel its rage, meeting blade with adamantium, speed with instinct. Shingen drew first blood, his katana opening a wound across Logan's chest that would have killed a normal man. Logan's healing factor closed it within seconds, and the look on Shingen's face, the dawning realization that he faced something beyond his experience, was almost worth the pain. The duel ended with Logan's claws buried in Shingen's chest. The crime lord died as he had lived, without honor, without remorse, cursing the gaijin who had destroyed everything he had built. Logan withdrew his claws and watched the body fall, feeling nothing but exhaustion and the faint nausea that always followed killing. Mariko stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes fixed on her father's corpse. Logan expected horror, expected rejection, revulsion, the final confirmation that he was too monstrous to be loved. Instead, Mariko crossed the dojo floor, stepped over her father's body without looking down, and took Logan's bloodied hands in her own. "He was a monster," she said quietly. "You are not." They were engaged within the month. The wedding preparations became a symbol of hope, not just for Logan and Mariko, but for the entire X-Men. Their teammates travelled to Japan to celebrate, bringing gifts and good wishes and the promise that even those born to violence could find peace. The ceremony would be traditional, elaborate, a union of two worlds that had seemed irreconcilable. It never happened. The Hand had been watching. The ancient ninja clan, whose influence stretched across centuries and continents, had their own interests in the Ishida dynasty. Mastermind, recovered from his psychic destruction but forever diminished, had been hired to ensure that the wedding would not proceed. His illusions struck Mariko on the morning of the ceremony. She stood before Logan in her wedding kimono, more beautiful than he had ever seen her, and her eyes were empty of recognition. The words that emerged from her lips were not her own, but Mastermind's, a cruel puppet show designed to inflict maximum pain. "I cannot marry you," she said. "You are an animal, a monster. I was foolish to ever believe otherwise." Logan's world collapsed. He did not understand what had happened, would not understand for months, until the illusions faded and the truth emerged. In that moment, he knew only that the woman he loved had rejected him, had confirmed every fear he carried about his own worthlessness. He fled the ceremony in disgrace, returning to America, drowning his grief in violence and alcohol, and the desperate attempt to feel anything other than abandoned. Mariko emerged from Mastermind's influence weeks later, horrified by what she had done, desperate to explain, to apologize, to repair the damage. The reconciliation was slow and painful, built on honesty that should have come sooner and trust that had been badly wounded. But they found their way back to each other. They always did. The second engagement was quieter, more private, free from the elaborate trappings that had drawn the Hand's attention. Logan and Mariko built a life together in Japan, dividing his time between the X-Men and the woman who had become his anchor. Then the poison came. Mariko's enemies had not forgotten her. A rival faction within the Yakuza, seeking to claim the Yashida Empire for themselves, introduced a slow-acting toxin into her system during a business negotiation. By the time symptoms appeared, the poison had spread throughout her body, attacking organs that no medicine could repair. She was dying, slowly, agonizingly, with full awareness of what was happening. Logan searched desperately for a cure. He consulted every scientist, every mystic, every healer he could find. He begged Xavier for help, pleaded with the Shi'ar for advanced medical technology, even approached former enemies in the hope that someone somewhere knew how to save her. Nothing worked. In the end, Mariko made her final request. She lay in his arms, her body racked with pain, her breath coming in shallow gasps that signaled hours rather than days. The poison had stolen her beauty, her strength, her ability to speak above a whisper, but it had not stolen her dignity. "Please," she breathed, "I cannot bear any more. You are the only one I trust to end it." Logan wept. For the first time since Rosa died on his claws a century ago, he wept openly, tears streaming down a face that had forgotten how to show vulnerability. He held the woman he loved and begged her to ask for anything else, anything but this, anything but the one thing he could not survive giving. She touched his face with trembling fingers. "It's not murder," she said. "It is mercy. It is love. Please, my darling, let me go." The claws emerged, one clean strike, painless, instantaneous. The woman he loved more than life itself died in his arms, killed by the same hands that had held her, protected her, promised to cherish her forever. Logan held her body as the sun set over Kyoto, as the cherry blossoms continued their eternal drift toward Earth, as the world went on spinning without the woman who had given it meaning. Mono no aware, the beauty of transience, the understanding that all things must end. He had come to Japan seeking peace. He left with only ashes. The first time Logan remembered Victor Creed, the man was standing over a corpse. The memory surfaced without warning, as so many of his memories did, a fragment breaking loose from the static that obscured his past, floating to the surface of his consciousness like debris from a shipwreck. He was in a bar in Madripoor, drinking alone, mourning Mariko in the only way he knew how when the smell hit him. Blood and musk and something rotten underneath. a scent he knew in his bones, in his cells, in the deepest recesses of a mind that had been wiped and rebuilt more times than he could count. He turned, and Sabretooth smiled at him. "Happy birthday, Runt." The attack came before the words finished echoing. 300 pounds of feral mutant crashing through tables and bottles and bodies, claws that matched Logan's own tearing through flesh that healed almost as quickly as his. They fought with the intimacy of old lovers and the hatred of blood enemies, each knowing exactly where to strike to cause maximum pain, each surviving wounds that would have killed any ordinary creature. The bar was destroyed. Half the patrons were dead or dying. When the authorities finally arrived, both combatants had vanished, leaving behind only wreckage and the lingering stench of violence. This was the pattern. This had always been the pattern. Victor Creed, Sabretooth, was Logan's dark mirror, his shadow-given flesh, the answer to every question he feared to ask about his own nature. Their histories were intertwined in ways that neither fully understood, tangled together by decades of shared violence and the deliberate obfuscation of those who had used them both as weapons. They might have been brothers. The possibility haunted Logan, surfacing in nightmares and fragmented memories that could have been real or could have been implanted by Weapon X. Thomas Logan, his biological father, killed by his own bone claws on that terrible night at the Howlett estate, had been a brutal man with appetites that extended beyond his wife and groundskeeper's position. Had there been other women? Other children? Had Victor Creed emerged from the same poisoned bloodline that had produced the Wolverine? The truth remained elusive. Perhaps there was no truth, only the stories they told themselves to make sense of senseless violence. What Logan knew for certain was this. Every year, on his birthday, Sabretooth found him. It did not matter where Logan was, Westchester or Tokyo, Madripoor or the Canadian wilderness. It did not matter what defences he erected, what precautions he took, what allies stood beside him. On that one day, Sabretooth would appear and blood would flow. Sometimes Logan won, sometimes Creed won. The outcome was almost irrelevant. What mattered was the ritual itself, the annual reminder that Logan could never escape his past, could never truly become the man he wanted to be. Sabretooth existed to prove that the animal was all either of them would ever be. "You're a killer," Creed would snarl, his claws buried in Logan's flesh. "Stop pretending you're anything else." The worst part was the doubt, the creeping suspicion that Sabretooth was right, that the heroism and the honour and the desperate striving towards something better were all just masks over the beast underneath. Their shared history extended far beyond birthdays. Team X, the CIA. The black operations that Logan remembered only in fragments, where he and Creed had worked alongside Maverick and Silver Fox and others whose names had been erased from his memory. They had been killers together, instruments of governments that used them and discarded them according to the needs of the moment. They had saved each other's lives on missions they could not discuss, built something approaching camaraderie in the spaces between violence. But Creed had always been different. Logan fought the beast. Every day, every hour, every moment, he struggled against the animal instincts that demanded blood and dominance and the simple pleasure of killing. The struggle defined him, the constant battle between what he was and what he wanted to be. Sabretooth had no such struggle. He had surrendered to the beast long ago, embraced it, celebrated it. He killed because killing felt good. He hurt because hurting felt better. He was everything Logan feared becoming, a preview of the future that awaited if he ever stopped fighting. Silver Fox had been caught between them. Her face emerged from the static sometimes. Dark hair, dark eyes, a smile that suggested secrets. Logan remembered loving her, in the way he remembered loving so many women whose names and faces blurred together across the decades. He remembered a cabin in the Canadian wilderness, a life that approached peace, a happiness that seemed almost within reach. He remembered finding her dead. Sabretooth's work, or so the memory insisted. Creed standing over her broken body, grinning that terrible grin, offering birthday greetings over the corpse of everything Logan had loved. The trauma had shattered him, had sent him spiralling into darkness from which he might never have emerged. But the memory was false, or partially false, or true in some ways and manufactured in others. Weapon X had implanted so many fictions in his mind that Logan could not trust his own recall, could not know with certainty which tragedies were real and which had been designed to condition him. Silver Fox had appeared years later, alive and working for Hydra, and the reunion had raised more questions than it answered. Had Sabretooth killed her? Had she ever been dead? Had their love been real, or just another layer of programming? The uncertainty was its own form of torture. Creed, of course, claimed credit regardless. He spoke of Silver Fox's death as if it were a treasured memory, described details that might have been accurate or might have been designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. He understood that the not knowing was worse than any truth, that Logan's fractured mind was a weapon that could be turned against itself. Their battles became legend among those who knew of such things. In Madripoor, where they fought through the streets of Lowtown, leaving bodies in their wake. In New York, where Sabretooth infiltrated the Xavier Mansion and nearly killed several students before Logan drove him out. In Japan, where Creed appeared at Mariko's funeral to mock Logan's grief, and the fight that followed leveled an entire city block. Each encounter was different, yet fundamentally the same. Violence without resolution, hatred without catharsis. Two creatures bound together by blood and history, and the certainty that neither could ever truly destroy the other. Logan had killed Sabretooth, more than once by his count, though the exact number was difficult to determine. The most definitive had involved the Muramasa blade, a mystical weapon forged from Logan's own rage, capable of inflicting wounds that even the most powerful healing factor could not repair. He had taken Creed's head with that blade, had watched the body fall, had allowed himself to believe that the nightmare was finally over. It was not over. Sabretooth returned. He always returned. Death was an inconvenience for both of them, a temporary setback rather than a conclusion. Whatever force kept Logan alive across the centuries extended to his dark mirror as well, ensuring that their war would continue until the universe itself burned out. The philosophical divide between them was absolute. Logan believed in redemption. He fought alongside the X-Men because he believed that mutants could be more than the world expected them to be, that the circumstances of one's birth did not determine the content of one's character. He had killed. God, how he had killed. But each death weighed on him, accumulated like stones in his chest, drove him to seek some form of atonement. Sabretooth believed in nothing but appetite. He killed because killing was what he was made for. He served whoever paid him, betrayed whoever trusted him, destroyed whatever crossed his path. Morality was a joke humans told themselves to feel better about their own weakness. The strong took what they wanted and the weak suffered what they must. This was the only truth that mattered. "You could be free," Creed said once, during a rare moment of something approaching conversation. "You could stop pretending, stop caring, stop fighting what you are. Join me, be what we were born to be." Logan's response was 3 claws through Creed's throat. But the offer lingered. The temptation whispered in the dark hours when the weight of his losses threatened to crush him. Mariko was dead. June was dead. Everyone he loved was dead or would be dead, and his healing factor would keep him alive to mourn them all. What was the point of fighting when the fight never ended? What was the point of hope when hope always died? Sabretooth represented the answer he refused to accept, the surrender he could never allow himself. Their war continued, would probably continue until the sun consumed the earth and scattered their ashes across the void. Because Logan was not Sabretooth. No matter how much blood stained his hands, no matter how many bodies littered his past, no matter how loud the beast inside him roared for release, he was not his dark mirror. He chose to be better. Every day, every fight, every breath. That choice was the only thing that separated them, and it was everything. The future smelled like ash and burning flesh. Logan crouched in the ruins of what had once been the Xavier Mansion, listening to the distant thunder of Sentinel patrols, feeling the vibration of their footsteps through earth that had been scorched and scarred by decades of war. The year was 2013, though years had lost most of their meaning in a world where survival was measured in hours rather than seasons. Above him, the sky glowed perpetual orange, choked with the smoke of cities that had burned and never stopped burning. This was the world that humanity had chosen, the world that fear had built. It had begun with an assassination. Senator Robert Kelly, one of the most vocal anti-mutant politicians in America, shot, dead at a rally by members of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. The act was meant to be a statement, a declaration that mutants would no longer tolerate persecution. Instead, it had been a death sentence, not just for the senator, but for mutant kind itself. The backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Laws that had been debated became mandates, registration programs became internment camps, and the Sentinels, giant robots designed to hunt and neutralize mutant threats, were deployed not as a last resort but as a first response. Their programming expanded to include not just active combatants, but anyone carrying the X gene. Men, women, children. It did not matter. The machines did not discriminate. Within a decade, the mutant population had been reduced by 90%. Logan had watched it happen, had fought against it with everything he had, standing alongside teammates who fell one by one to the relentless mechanical tide. Cyclops died defending a refugee convoy, his optic. Blas finally overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Storm fell protecting a group of children, her weather powers no match for Sentinels designed specifically to counter them. Colossus, Nightcrawler, Banshee. The roll call of the dead grew longer with each passing year, until Logan could barely remember a time when the mansion had been filled with life rather than ghosts. Now he was one of the last. The Resistance operated from the mansion's ruins, using the underground tunnels that Xavier had built decades ago for training exercises that seemed almost quaint in retrospect. Their numbers were pitiful, a handful of aging mutants and their human allies, fighting a war they had already lost. Kate Pryde led them now, the girl once called Kitty having grown into a woman hardened by grief and responsibility. Her phasing powers had kept her alive when so many others had died, allowing her to slip through Sentinel grasps, to pass through walls that should have been prisons. She had a plan. Desperate, impossible plan that represented their only remaining hope. "We can change it," Kate explained, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that lined her face. "Rachel can send my consciousness back to my younger self, before the assassination, before everything went wrong. I can warn them, stop the Brotherhood, prevent this future from ever happening." Rachel Summers was the daughter of Scott and Jean, a telepath of extraordinary power who had survived by hiding her abilities until she was strong enough to fight. Her connection to the Phoenix Force, inherited from her mother, gave her access to abilities that transcended normal psionic limits, including, theoretically, the ability to project a mind across time itself. Logan listened to the plan with the skepticism of a man who had seen too many plans fail. Time travel, changing history. These were concepts from science fiction, not strategies for actual warfare. But he had also learned, across his long and bloody life, that desperate times demanded desperate measures. "What do you need from us?" he asked. "Time," Kate replied. "The transfer will take several minutes. Rachel will be vulnerable while maintaining the connection. The Sentinels will detect the psionic activity and converge on our position. We need someone to hold them off long enough for me to complete the mission." Someone. She meant him. They all knew she meant him. Logan looked around at the remnants of his family, the scarred survivors of a war that had taken everything. Magneto was there, his helmet dented and his powers diminished but his will unbroken. The former enemy had become an ally when common extinction threatened both their dreams. Franklin Richards, son of the Fantastic Four, his reality-warping abilities burned out from overuse. A handful of others whose names Logan had learned to avoid memorizing, because learning names meant mourning deaths. "Do it," he said. "I'll buy you whatever time you need." The Sentinels came at dawn. 3 of the Mark 7 models, each standing 40 feet tall, their chassis reinforced with adamantium plating that Logan recognized with bitter irony. They had used his skeleton as a template, reverse engineering the bonding process to create armor that his own claws could barely scratch. The machines learned. The machines adapted. The machines were winning because they had no limits on their capacity for evolution. Logan met them in the ruins of the front gate, claws extended, healing factor already working to repair the damage from his last encounter. He was old now, not in appearance, his mutation prevented that, but in the weariness that had settled into his bones. A century and a half of violence, decades of watching friends die. The exhaustion went deeper than flesh, deeper than adamantium, down to the core of whatever passed for his soul. But exhaustion did not matter, only the mission mattered. "Come on then," he snarled at the approaching machine. "Let's dance." The battle was hopeless from the start. Logan knew this. He fought anyway because fighting was all he had ever known how to do. His claws opened wounds in sentinel armor that self-repaired almost as quickly as his own flesh. Energy blasts scorched through his body, destroying organs that regenerated in agonizing waves. He was torn apart and rebuilt over and over, buying seconds with each death, each resurrection. Inside the mansion, Kate Pryde's consciousness hurtled backward through time. She arrived in her younger body at the precise moment needed. In the past that was Logan's present, before the assassination, before the laws, before the Sentinels became genocide machines. She convinced the X-Men of her identity, warned them of what was coming, helped them mount a desperate mission to prevent the Brotherhood's attack. The fight to save Senator Kelly was chaotic, violent, and ultimately successful. Mystique's assassination attempt was thwarted. Kelly survived, shaken but alive, his hatred of mutants tempered by the knowledge that mutants had saved him. The timeline shifted. In the future, the world began to change around them. Sentinels flickered, their programming suddenly uncertain, their targets suddenly unclear. The camps began to fade, the dead began to, not return but become less certain, their existence hovering between what had been and what would now never be. Logan felt it happening as he fell beneath a Sentinel's boot, his body crushed beyond even his healing factor's ability to repair quickly enough. He felt the future dissolving around him, felt the weight of all those years of loss beginning to lift. Kate had done it. She had changed history. This timeline, this horror, would never exist. But Logan would not remember. None of them would remember. The consciousness that had fought and suffered and watched everyone he loved die would simply cease to be, replaced by a version of himself that had never experienced this particular apocalypse. He closed his eyes as the world unwound around him, and in the present, in the timeline that Kate had saved, Logan woke in his bed at the Xavier mansion, momentarily disoriented, carrying the fading echo of a nightmare he could not quite recall. The sun was shining, his teammates were alive. The future remained unwritten. But somewhere in the depths of his healing mind, a warning lingered, a knowledge that humanity's fear of mutants, if left unchecked, could still birth the horrors he had almost witnessed. The Sentinels were coming. Maybe not today, maybe not in the way Kate's future had predicted, but they were coming, and Logan would be ready. He had seen what happened when he wasn't. The space station hung above the Earth like a silver blade poised to fall. Avalon, Magneto called it, a sanctuary for mutants who had abandoned Xavier's dream of coexistence, who believed that humanity would never accept them, and that the only path forward was separation or dominance. The station had been constructed from the remains of Grey Malkin, Cable's orbital base, rebuilt and repurposed by the Master of Magnetism into a monument to his vision. From its observation decks, the blue curve of Earth filled the viewports, beautiful and terrible and forever beyond reach. Magneto had returned from death, or what had seemed like death, more powerful and more convinced than ever that his methods were the only ones that could save mutant kind. The acolytes had gathered to him, fervent believers in mutant supremacy who viewed him as something between prophet and god. They conducted raids on human facilities, recruited disillusioned mutants from Xavier's school, and preached a gospel of inevitable war. The final straw came when Magneto unleashed an electromagnetic pulse that crippled the entire eastern seaboard. Hospitals lost power, aircraft fell from the sky, life support systems failed in facilities across half a continent. The death toll climbed into the thousands before emergency systems could compensate, and the world watched in horror as one mutant demonstrated exactly how helpless humanity was against powers they could neither understand nor control. Xavier had tried diplomacy. He had reached out to his old friend through their psychic connection, pleading for restraint, for negotiation, for anything other than the escalating violence that threatened to prove every anti-mutant bigot correct. Magneto had responded with contempt, severing their bond, declaring that the time for dreams had ended. The X-Men went to war. The assault on Avalon was mounted with every resource the team could muster. Multiple squads launched simultaneously, breaching the station's defences through a combination of brute force and tactical precision. The acolytes fought back with religious fervour, willing to die for their master's vision. but they were outmatched by opponents who had spent years training together, who knew each other's abilities as intimately as their own. Logan was in the lead squad. He moved through the station's corridors like a force of nature, claws carving through bulkheads and bodies with equal ease. The acolytes had been warned about him, the feral X-Man whose healing factor made him nearly impossible to stop, whose adamantium skeleton made him a walking weapon. They threw everything they had at him. It was not enough. The confrontation with Magneto happened in the station's central chamber, a vast space dominated by viewports that showed the Earth turning slowly below. The Master of Magnetism floated at its centre, his cape billowing in currents of his own creation, his eyes burning with the righteous fury of a man who believed himself to be humanity's only hope for survival. "Charles sends his attack dogs," Magneto said, his voice echoing through the chamber with theatrical contempt. "How predictable, how disappointing. This ends now, Eric." Cyclops stood at the front of the assembled X-Men, his hand on his, visor, ready to unleash the full force of his optic blasts. "Surrender, and we can still find a peaceful resolution." Magneto laughed. The sound was hollow, bitter, devoid of anything approaching genuine amusement. "Peace, your mentor's favourite delusion. Tell me, Summers, how many of your kind have died while Xavier preached peace? How many more will die before you understand that humans will never accept us?" The battle erupted without warning. Magneto's powers lashed out in all directions, manipulating the metal of the station itself, turning walls into weapons and floors into traps. The X-Men scattered, each engaging according to their abilities, Jean Grey's telekinesis countering his magnetic fields, Storm's lightning providing cover, Colossus and Rogue pressing forward through the chaos. Logan saw his opening. He launched himself at Magneto with every ounce of speed his enhanced physiology could provide, claws extended, aiming for the moment between the Master of Magnetism's attacks when his defenses might be weakest. The distance closed in heartbeats. His claws were inches from Magneto's throat. Then Magneto turned his attention to Logan, and the world became pain. It began as pressure, an invisible force gripping his skeleton, the 200 pounds of adamantium that had been bonded to his bones in the nightmare of Weapon X. Logan had faced Magneto before, had felt the man's powers wrap around his metal-laced frame, but this was different. This was not manipulation. This was violence on a molecular level. "You dare," Magneto whispered, his voice carrying despite the chaos around them. "You dare raise your claws against me? Do you have any idea what I could do to you?" The pressure increased. Logan felt his bones shift within his flesh, felt the adamantium begin to move in ways it was never meant to move. His healing factor screamed in response, desperately trying to repair damage that was being inflicted faster than any regeneration could compensate. "I could tear you apart from the inside," Magneto continued, floating closer, his face a mask of cold fury. "I could pull every atom of that metal through your pores, leave you a boneless sack of meat twitching on my floor. You're not a weapon against me, Wolverine. You are a weapon I choose not to use." Logan tried to respond, tried to snarl defiance, to lunge forward, to do anything other than hang suspended in Magneto's magnetic grip. But the pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced, beyond the adamantium bonding, beyond the centuries of violence, beyond every torture he had endured and survived. Then Magneto pulled. The adamantium came out, not quickly, not cleanly. Every molecule of metal that had been fused to Logan's skeleton was ripped free through his flesh, through his muscles, through his skin. It emerged from his body in a liquid stream of silver agony, pulled by Magneto's powers into a floating mass that hung in the air between them like a sculptured testament to suffering. Logan screamed. The sound was not human. It was the howl of an animal being vivisected, of a soul being torn from its housing, of pain so absolute that it transcended the physical and became something metaphysical. His healing factor went into overdrive, trying desperately to repair damage that should have been instantly fatal, knitting tissue that was being destroyed even as it formed. His teammates watched in horror. Jean Grey reached out with her telekinesis, trying to stop the extraction, but Magneto's magnetic fields were too powerful, too focused, too driven by a rage that had been building for decades. Cyclops fired his optic blast at full power, only to see them deflected by barriers of controlled metal. Storm's lightning struck Magneto squarely and accomplished nothing. The extraction took 47 seconds. To Logan, It lasted an eternity. When it was over, he fell to the deck like a puppet whose strings had been cut. His body was a ruin, skin hanging in, tatters, muscles visible through gaps in flesh, bones that were no longer reinforced by indestructible metal showing white through red. His healing factor worked frantically, burning through energy reserves he did not know he possessed, pulling him back from a death that should have been certain. Magneto floated above him, the adamantium forming a perfect sphere in his hands, his expression shifting from rage to something that might have been satisfaction. "Let this be a lesson," the Master of Magnetism announced to the assembled X-Men. "I am not your enemy, not yet. But cross me again, and I will show you what true power looks like." Xavier's response came from across the void of space, a psychic assault of unprecedented force that tore through Magneto's mental defenses and shut down his conscious mind in an instant. The attack violated every principle the professor had ever espoused, every ethical boundary he had taught his students to respect. But he had just watched one of his X-Men tortured nearly to death, and principles meant nothing in the face of that horror. Magneto fell. The battle ended. But for Logan, the aftermath was only beginning. The mansion's medical bay became his world for weeks. His healing factor, the mutation that had kept him alive through everything, had been pushed beyond its limits and was behaving erratically. His body, freed from the adamantium that had weighted it for so long, began changing in ways no one had predicted. The first surprise was his claws. They had returned, not metal, but bone. The same bone protrusions that had first emerged on that terrible night at the Howlett estate. The claws that had always been part of him before Weapon X grafted adamantium over them. They were shorter now, sharper, growing from his forearms with a speed that suggested his mutation was compensating for the lost metal. The second surprise was his healing factor itself. Without the adamantium suppressing it, and Logan had not known it was, being suppressed until it wasn't, his regeneration accelerated dramatically. Wounds that would have taken minutes to heal now closed in seconds. His senses sharpened to levels he'd not experienced since before the bonding process. But the third change was the most disturbing. Logan was becoming feral. The adamantium had been more than reinforcement. It had been a cage, a constraint on a mutation that wanted to push him further from human and closer to animal. Without that metal anchor, his features began to shift. His posture hunched. His thoughts became simpler, more instinct-driven, less capable of the complex reasoning that distinguished man from beast. He was evolving, or devolving. The distinction had never seemed less clear. The X-Men did not know how to help him. Beast ran tests that showed genetic markers in flux, a mutation rewriting itself in real time. Xavier offered telepathic assistance that Logan refused, unwilling to let anyone else inside a mind that was becoming increasingly alien even to himself. He withdrew from the team, from the mansion, from everything that had given his life meaning since Charles Xavier had first reached out to him. The wilderness called, as it always did when civilization became too much to bear. And somewhere in the depths of his changing mind, the beast began to stir. The man who had been Logan crouched in the shadows of a cave, gnawing on the bones of something that had once been a deer. He did not remember killing it, did not remember the hunt, the chase, the moment his bone claws had opened its throat and spilled its life onto the forest floor. Memory had become a luxury his mind could no longer afford, replaced by the simpler imperatives of hunger and survival. He ate because his body demanded fuel. He slept when exhaustion overcame vigilance. He killed anything that threatened him and fled from nothing. The transformation had accelerated in the weeks since he had left the mansion. His face was barely recognizable now. The features that had once been ruggedly human had flattened, broadened, taken on an almost canine aspect that made strangers recoil in terror. His nose had diminished to nearly nothing, his nostrils widening into slits that dominated his upper face. His posture was permanently hunched, his spine curving to accommodate a body that seemed to be redesigning itself for quadrupedal movement. Hair covered more of his skin than before, coarse and dark, providing insulation against elements that no longer troubled him. He was becoming something else, something that had never existed before, a new species perhaps, or a very old one remembering itself. The bone claws were the only part of him that remained familiar. They emerged from his knuckles with the same snikt that had accompanied the adamantium, though the sound was softer now, organic rather than metallic. They were weapons of last resort, used only when teeth and nails proved insufficient. His healing factor had made him nearly invulnerable. His devolution was making him nearly unrecognizable. The wilderness became his kingdom. He ranged across the Canadian Rockies, through forests that had never known human habitation, across mountains that existed on no map. Animals fled from his approach, or attacked, and died for their courage. He encountered bears and wolves and mountain lions, established dominance through violence that left no room for doubt. The predators learned to avoid his territory. The prey learned to run faster. Occasionally, he encountered others like himself. Wildchild found him first. Kyle Gibney, a mutant whose feral nature had never been tempered by civilization. He approached Logan's territory with the caution of a subordinate seeking acceptance from an alpha. His own claws retracted, his posture submissive. They circled each other for hours, communicating in growls and body language that transcended human speech. For a time, they ran together, two predators sharing, hunting grounds, neither quite trusting the other but both recognizing the value of temporary alliance. Wildchild was younger, faster, more completely animal than Logan had yet become. He showed Logan how to surrender to the beast, how to stop fighting the transformation and simply exist in the moment. But Logan could not fully surrender. Somewhere beneath the animal instincts, fragments of the man remained. Memories of faces he could no longer name, emotions he could no longer articulate, a sense that this existence, however natural it felt, was not what he was meant for. He drove Wildchild away eventually, the alliance dissolving into territorial violence that left both of them bleeding. The younger feral fled south, seeking others of his kind. Logan remained alone, as he had always been alone, as he suspected he would always be. The X-Men searched for him. John Grey, alive again, resurrected by forces that Logan's fading human mind could not comprehend, reached out, telepathically, trying to find the consciousness she had once known. She encountered only static, only animal awareness, only the echo of a man who was rapidly ceasing to exist. Cyclops led field teams into the wilderness, following rumors and sightings, always arriving too late to find anything but abandoned campsites and the remains of kills. They wanted to help him. He understood this in some distant part of his mind that still processed abstract concepts. But help implied a problem that could be solved, a condition that could be reversed. Logan was not sick. He was evolving, becoming what his mutation had always wanted him to be, what the adamantium had prevented him from becoming. The question was whether the man would survive the transformation. Genesis answered that question with violence. Tyler Dayspring, the son of Cable, corrupted by dark forces into a villain who called himself Genesis, had been watching Logan's devolution with keen interest. He saw opportunity in the feral mutant's condition, a chance to create a weapon that would serve his own apocalyptic ambitions. If the adamantium could be restored, if Logan could be brought back from the brink of pure animalism, he might become the perfect instrument of destruction. The capture was brutal but efficient. Genesis deployed technology that even Logan's enhanced senses could not detect, traps that closed before instinct could trigger escape. He woke in a laboratory that reminded him of nothing and everything. Sterile walls, humming machinery, the smell of antiseptic that cut through even his diminished human awareness. The great Wolverine, Genesis mocked, circling the restrained mutant like a predator examining prey. Reduced to this, a beast without purpose, without identity, without even the metal that made you famous. I'm going to fix that. I'm going to give you back your claws, your strength, your place in the world, and in return you're going to serve me. The adamantium bonding procedure began. But Logan's body had changed too much. The mutation that had been suppressed for so long had rewritten his physiology on a fundamental level, and it rejected the metal with catastrophic force. The adamantium that Genesis tried to bond to his skeleton was expelled violently, erupting from his flesh in liquid streams that splattered across laboratory walls. The pain was familiar, an echo of Magneto's extraction, of Weapon X's original procedure. But the result was unprecedented. Logan's healing factor went into overdrive, his mutation surging to protect itself from foreign intrusion. His body completed its transformation in minutes rather than months, becoming something that Genesis had never anticipated. The creature that broke free from the laboratory restraints was barely humanoid. It had no nose at all now, only slits. Its spine was curved almost double, forcing it into a perpetual crouch. Its claws, still bone, forever bone, extended to nearly a foot in length. It moved, with speed that defied physics, tearing through Genesis's guards like paper, pursuing the fleeing villain with single-minded fury. Genesis escaped, barely. The creature that had been Logan did not pursue beyond the laboratory's boundaries, instead vanishing into the surrounding wilderness, leaving behind only corpses and questions. The X-Men found him weeks later, or rather, Elektra found him. The assassin had her own history with Logan, her own understanding of what it meant to lose oneself to violence and darkness. She tracked him across 3 states, following signs that no ordinary tracker would have recognized, until she discovered him in a cave in the Adirondacks, surrounded by the bones of his kills. She did not try to capture him, did not try to reason with the beast. Instead, she simply sat at the entrance to his cave and waited. Days passed. Logan watched her with animal wariness, uncertain whether she was threat or prey. She did not move, did not speak, did not do anything that might trigger his hunting instincts. She simply existed, patient and still, until curiosity overcame caution. He approached, sniffed her, recognized something beneath the surface. Not a specific memory, but a feeling. Trust. Safety. The knowledge that this person, whoever she was, would not harm him. The rehabilitation began. Elektra led him back toward humanity one step at a time, using techniques drawn from martial arts traditions that understood the animal mind. She taught him to control his breathing, to focus his awareness, to find the human consciousness buried beneath layers of feral instinct. It took months. It nearly failed a dozen times. But slowly, painfully, the man called Logan began to emerge from the beast that had consumed him. He would never fully recover. The transformation had left permanent marks. His features remained altered, his instincts remained sharper than any human's, his connection to the animal world remained stronger than his connection to civilization. But he could think again, speak again, remember who he had been and choose who he wanted to become. The choice, when it came, was offered by an unexpected source. Apocalypse had been watching, and he had a proposition. The chamber existed outside of time, ancient stone walls covered in hieroglyphics that predated human civilization. Technology so advanced it appeared magical, humming with energies that made Logan's feral senses scream in warning. And at the center of it all, seated on a throne carved from the bones of forgotten gods, the being who called himself Apocalypse. Ensabar Nur had been born 5,000 years ago, in a valley that would one day become Egypt. He was among the first mutants, perhaps the very first, and his power had grown across millennia until he had become something more than mortal. His philosophy was simple, brutal, and absolute: survival of the fittest. The strong would inherit the earth, the weak would perish. Evolution was not a gentle process, but a crucible, and only those who emerged from the flames deserved to exist. He had watched Logan's devolution with great interest. "You stand at a crossroads," Apocalypse said, his voice resonating through the chamber like thunder echoing in a canyon. "The man you were is dying. The beast you are becoming has no future beyond animal existence, but there is a third path, one that would restore what you have lost and grant you purpose, beyond mere survival." Logan crouched at the chamber's entrance, still more animal than man, his bone claws extended and his muscles tensed for violence. The words reached him through layers of feral instinct, their meaning filtering slowly into a consciousness that had nearly forgotten language. "What do you want?" The words came out rough, broken, barely recognizable as human speech. "I want a horseman." Apocalypse rose from his throne, his massive form casting shadows that seemed to move independently of the light. "My horseman of death. Warrior without equal, fear made flesh. The instrument through which I will reshape this world. You could be that warrior, Logan. You could be death itself." The offer hung in the air like poison disguised as medicine. Logan understood, even through the haze of his transformation, what Apocalypse was proposing. servitude, slavery, the surrender of whatever remained of his free will to a monster whose ambitions would drown the world in blood. Everything he had fought for, everything the X-Men represented, would be betrayed by accepting. But he was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of losing. Tired of watching everyone he loved die while he endured, century after century, accumulating grief like stones in a river until the weight threatened to drag him under forever. The beast offered escape from that exhaustion, a surrender to instinct that required no thought, no memory, no pain. But the beast was also a dead end, a path that led nowhere but deeper into darkness. Apocalypse offered something different, purpose, power, an end to the transformation that was erasing everything he had ever been. The adamantium, Logan growled. You can restore it? I possess technology beyond anything your Weapon X could imagine. Celestial science, refined across millennia. I can bond the metal to your skeleton more completely than before, restore your form, stabilize your mutation. You would be stronger than you have ever been, faster, more lethal. Apocalypse paused, letting the promise settle. All I require in return is loyalty. Loyalty. Such a simple word for such a terrible bargain. Logan thought of Mariko, dead by his own claws, of Jean burning in the heart of a sun, of Rose impaled on bone blades meant for someone else. Everyone he had ever loved was gone, and his healing factor ensured he would live long enough to lose everyone he might love in the future. What was loyalty to a monster compared to the loyalty he had shown to people who kept dying despite his best? Efforts to protect them? He was at the bottom, the absolute nadir of his existence, a feral creature crouching in a cave, neither man nor beast, belonging nowhere and to no one. Yes, he said. The word tasted like ashes. I'll be your death. The procedure that followed was nothing like Weapon X. Apocalypse's technology was organic, almost alive, responding to Logan's biology with an intelligence that human science could not match. The adamantium was introduced gradually, bonded to his skeleton through a process that worked with his healing factor rather than against it. The pain was present, but manageable, a distant echo of the agony he had endured in the tank decades ago. But the physical transformation was only the beginning. Apocalypse's conditioning went deeper than flesh, deeper than bone, deeper than the metal that was once again becoming part of Logan's identity. Psychic programming rewrote neural pathways that his healing factor could not protect. Technological implants created fail-safes and override commands that would ensure obedience. The man called Logan was systematically dismantled and rebuilt as something else entirely, death. When the process was complete, the creature that emerged from Apocalypse's laboratory bore no resemblance to the Wolverine the X-Men had known. His body was encased in armor of black and silver, his face hidden behind a mask that revealed only eyes burning with cold fire. His adamantium claws, restored, enhanced, sharper than they had ever been, extended from gauntlets designed to maximize their lethality. He did not speak, did not think, did not feel anything except the imperative to serve his master and destroy his master's enemies. The X-Men became targets. Death descended on the Xavier mansion without warning, cutting through defenses that had been designed to repel armies. He fought his former teammates with brutal efficiency, exploiting weaknesses he knew intimately, striking at vulnerabilities that only a friend could have identified. Cyclops fell first, his visor shattered by claws that moved faster than his optic blast could track. Storm was next, grounded by wounds that her weather powers could not prevent. Jean Grey faced him with tears streaming down her face, her telepathy desperately searching for the man she had once loved within the monster he had become. Logan, please, I know you're in there. Fight this. Fight him. Death did not respond. Death did not hesitate. His claws rose for the killing stroke and stopped. Somewhere beneath the programming, beneath the conditioning, beneath the layers of control that Apocalypse had imposed, a fragment of Logan remained. A piece too stubborn to be erased, too feral to be tamed, too fundamentally him to surrender completely. It seized control for just an instant, forcing the claws to halt inches from Jean's throat. That instant was enough. Jean plunged into his mind with everything she had, tearing through Apocalypse's psychic defenses, finding the core of the man she knew and anchoring herself to it. Xavier joined her, then Psylocke, then every telepath the X-Men could muster, their combined power overwhelming the conditioning that had seemed unbreakable. Logan screamed, a sound that was both Death's rage and Logan's anguish, two identities warring for control of a single body. The battle lasted seconds that felt like hours, fought on a psychic battlefield where the stakes were nothing less than his soul. He won, or rather, the X-Men won, pulling Logan back from the abyss, breaking Apocalypse's hold through sheer force of love and desperation. But victory came at a cost. The Death persona did not disappear. It retreated, coiling in the shadows of Logan's consciousness, waiting for weakness, waiting for an opportunity to resurface. The programming could be suppressed but not erased. The conditioning could be overcome but not forgotten. For the rest of his life, Logan would carry Apocalypse's horseman inside him, another voice in an already crowded mind, another monster lurking behind the man. The adamantium remained. That, at least, was permanent. His skeleton once again reinforced with indestructible metal, his claws once again capable of cutting through anything. He was whole again, in the physical sense. In every other sense, he was more broken than ever. Another violation, another master, another piece of himself stolen and corrupted by forces that saw him as nothing more than a weapon to be wielded. The X-Men welcomed him back with relief and wariness in equal measure. They had seen what he was capable of under Apocalypse's control. They had felt his claws at their throats, had watched him fight with lethal intent against everything he had once protected. Trust, once broken, was not easily rebuilt. Logan understood. He did not blame them for their caution. He barely trusted himself. The night the heroes fell, Logan killed them all, not the villains, not the enemies who had been trying to destroy them for decades. The heroes, his friends, his family, the X-Men who had trusted him with their lives, who had fought beside him through horrors that would have broken lesser souls, who had welcomed him into their home when the rest of the world saw only a monster. He killed them with his own claws, and he did not know he was doing it until it was far too late. Mysterio's illusion had been perfect. The master of deception had woven a psychic tapestry so complete, so convincing, that Logan's enhanced senses, the same senses that had saved his life countless times, could not penetrate it. When the attack began, when waves of enemies poured into the mansion, Logan saw only threats, saw only the villains he had been fighting for years, finally mounting their ultimate assault. He saw Bullseye and Lady Deathstrike and Omega Red. He saw Sabretooth and the Reavers, and a dozen other faces that triggered every killing instinct he possessed. He did not see Jubilee, her, fireworks replaced by phantom weapons. He did not see Nightcrawler, his teleportation reimagined as demonic assault. He did not see Storm or Colossus or Kitty Pryde, their powers twisted by Mysterio's magic into something unrecognizable. He saw enemies. He killed enemies. He was doing his job, protecting the school, being the weapon he had always been. The illusion lifted when the last body fell. Logan stood in the ruins of the mansion's entrance hall, surrounded by corpses that wore the wrong faces. His claws dripped with blood that smelled like family. His eyes processed what his mind could not accept. The people he had just slaughtered were not villains at all. They were X-Men. His X-Men. The people he had loved and protected and would have died for without hesitation. He had killed them all. The scream that tore from his throat was not human. It was the sound of a soul shattering, of a mind confronting a horror too vast to process. Mysterio watched from the shadows, his fishbowl, helmet reflecting the carnage, his laughter echoing through halls that had once been filled with hope and purpose. Across the country, across the world, similar scenes were playing out. The villains had coordinated, planned, waited for the perfect moment to strike simultaneously against every hero who stood in their way. The Avengers fell, the Fantastic Four fell, Spider-Man, Daredevil, the Defenders, all of them, overwhelmed by attacks they never saw coming, betrayed by allies who had been compromised, murdered by friends who had been deceived. The Age of Heroes ended in a single night. Logan walked away from the mansion and never returned. 50 years later, the man who had been Wolverine no longer existed. The territory that had once been California was ruled by the Hulk gang now, inbred descendants of Bruce Banner, each one carrying some measure of their ancestors' gamma-powered strength, none of them carrying any measure of his intellect or conscience. They had carved out a kingdom from the corpse of the American West, and they ruled it through violence and terror and the absolute certainty that no one remained who could challenge them. Logan lived on a small farm at the edge of their domain. He had a wife named Maureen, a woman who had never known the Wolverine, who had married a quiet man with sad eyes and a mysterious past. He had children, 2 of them, a boy and a girl, who knew nothing of mutants or X-Men or the world that had existed before their birth. He grew crops that barely sustained his family. He paid rent to the Hulk gang that always came due before he had the money to pay it. He did not fight. The claws had not emerged in 50 years. Logan had made a vow on the night he killed his family, his true family, the X-Men who had given him purpose, that he would never again use the weapons that had caused so much suffering. He would endure whatever the world inflicted on him. He would accept beatings, humiliation, degradation. He would watch injustice unfold and do nothing to stop it. Because every time he had fought, people had died. People he loved had died, and he could not survive causing that kind of pain again. The Hulk gang's enforcers came regularly, demanding payment Logan could not provide. They beat him in front of his children, broke bones that his healing factor quietly repaired, took whatever meagre possessions his family had managed to accumulate. Logan accepted it all without resistance, his eyes empty, his hands carefully still at his sides. His children watched their father's humiliation with confusion that bordered on contempt. They did not understand. They could not understand. They had never known the man who had stood against gods and monsters, who had been feared by creatures that made the Hulk gang look like children playing at villainy. That man was dead. Only the farmer remained. Then Hawkeye arrived. Clint Barton was old now, blind, his legendary accuracy maintained only through decades of practice and an almost supernatural connection to his bow. He had survived the fall of the heroes through luck and stubbornness, had spent the intervening years running jobs across the villain-controlled territories, making enough money to stay alive while dreaming of a day when things might change. He had a job, a big one, a delivery that needed to be made across the entire breadth of the former United States, through territories controlled by the worst monsters the world had ever produced. The pay was substantial, enough to clear Logan's debt to the Hulk gang, enough to secure his family's safety for years to come. All Logan had to do was drive. "I'm not fighting," Logan said, when Hawkeye explained the dangers they would face. "Whatever happens out there, I'm not popping the claws. I'm not that person anymore." "I know," Hawkeye replied, his blind eyes somehow conveying understanding. "I'm not asking you to fight. I'm asking you to drive. The fighting's my job." They left the next morning, Hawkeye's custom vehicle carrying them east through a landscape transformed by 50 years of villain rule. The America they traversed was unrecognizable, divided into territories controlled by monsters who had once been defeated regularly, by the heroes they had finally managed to destroy. Each region had its own horrors, its own atrocities, its own reminders of what had been lost. They passed through the domain of the Kingpin, where New York had become a criminal empire that made the old mob look quaint. They skirted territories controlled by Dr. Doom, by the Red Skull, by creatures whose names Logan had tried to forget. They saw suffering on a scale that would have driven the old Wolverine to berserker rage. Logan kept driving, kept his hands on the wheel, kept the claws inside. The journey took weeks. They encountered bandits and warlords and victims who begged for help that Logan could not provide. Hawkeye fought when fighting was necessary, his arrows finding targets, with impossible accuracy despite his blindness. Logan drove, watched, remembered a time when he would have been the one charging into battle while others hung back. That time was dead, like everyone he had ever loved. They completed the delivery. Hawkeye paid Logan his share, enough money to satisfy the Hulk gang, to secure his family's future, to finally buy the peace he had spent 50 years pursuing. Logan drove home with something approaching hope stirring in his chest. Perhaps it was possible. Perhaps he could live out his remaining years as a farmer, watching his children grow, growing old beside Maureen, in a world that had forgotten the Wolverine ever existed. The farm was too quiet when he arrived. He knew before he entered the house, knew from the smell of blood that hung in the air. from the stillness that spoke of violence completed rather than violence threatened. He walked through the front door and found what the Hulk gang had left for him, Maureen, his children, arranged in the living room like trophies, their bodies bearing the marks of brutality that served no purpose except cruelty. They had come for the rent while he was gone. They had decided that his family would pay in his absence. A note was pinned to his wife's body. 2 words scrawled in blood. Missed you. Logan stood in the ruins of everything he had built, surrounded by the bodies of people who had died because of him, because the Hulk gang knew he would not fight back, because his pacifism had made his family targets rather than protected them. 50 years of peace. 50 years of swallowing his rage, suppressing his instincts, believing that if he just stopped fighting, the people he loved might finally survive. They had died anyway. They always died anyway. Something ancient and terrible stirred in the depths of his consciousness. Something that had been sleeping for half a century, waiting for the moment when the cage finally broke. The claws emerged. The sound was the same as it had always been, that distinctive snick that had haunted the nightmares of villains for longer than most of them had been alive. 3 blades of adamantium per hand, 18 inches of indestructible metal that had carved through gods and demons and everything in between. The Wolverine was back. He found the Hulk gang at their compound, celebrating the entertainment they had provided themselves at his family's expense. They saw him coming and laughed. This old man they had beaten so many times, this farmer who never fought back, approaching their fortress with nothing but his fists. They stopped laughing when the claws came out. The slaughter that followed became legend in the territories. Logan moved through the Hulk gang like death itself, his healing factor shrugging off blows that would have killed armies, his claws opening wounds that gamma-powered regeneration could not close fast enough. He killed them all, every cousin, every nephew, every inbred monster who had built their kingdom on fear and cruelty. Bruce Banner himself emerged to face the destruction of his lineage. The Hulk, older now, larger, more powerful than he had ever been, swallowed Logan whole, believing that even adamantium claws could not escape his gamma-powered digestive system. He was wrong. Logan cut his way out from the inside, erupting from the Hulk's stomach in a spray of green blood and viscera, standing over the corpse of a creature that had terrorized an entire coast for 50 years. The legend was complete. The Wolverine had returned, and the villain who had thought himself invincible lay dead at his feet. In the ruins of Banner's compound, Logan found an infant. Bruce Banner Jr., the only innocent among the monsters, a child who had not yet learned to be cruel. He took the baby, climbed onto a motorcycle that had once belonged to one of the Hulk gang, rode east toward a world that was still broken, still ruled by villains, still drowning in the consequences of that terrible night 50 years ago, but perhaps not forever. The Wolverine was back, and he had work to do. The first wound that did not heal was a knife cut across his forearm, a simple injury, the kind Logan had sustained thousands of times across his long and violent life. A bar fight in Vancouver, a drunk taking offense at something Logan had said, a blade that sliced through flesh that should have knitted itself together within seconds. The blood kept flowing. Logan stared at the wound with confusion that slowly transformed into horror. His healing factor, the mutation that had kept him alive through wars and torture, and the adamantium bonding process itself, had stopped working. The cells that should have been regenerating were dormant, silent, as inactive as any ordinary humans. He was mortal. The diagnosis came from Beast, who ran every test his considerable scientific knowledge could devise. A virus, engineered specifically to target Logan's mutation, had been introduced to his system through means that remained unclear. The healing factor was not destroyed. It was suppressed, locked away behind biological barriers that even Hank McCoy could not breach. "How long?" Logan asked, watching blood drip from a wound that still had not closed. "I don't know," Beast admitted, his blue face grave with concern. "The virus appears stable. It could dissipate in days, or it could last indefinitely. Without your healing factor, you're vulnerable to every injury, every infection, every age-related deterioration that your body has been holding at bay for over a century." Logan looked at his hands, the same hands that had held Mariko as she died, that had failed to save Jean, that had killed more people than he could remember. For the first time since the 19th century, those hands could be stopped. Those hands could fail permanently. "Then I'd better be careful," he said. But his eyes told a different story. His eyes held something that might have been relief. The enemies came quickly. Word spread through the underworld with the speed of digital communication and the enthusiasm of predators scenting wounded prey. The Wolverine was vulnerable. The unkillable killer could finally be killed. Every enemy Logan had made across his century and a half of violence, and there were so many enemies, an army of grudges and vendettas and unfinished business, began to circle. Viper sent assassins. Sabretooth sent a message promising that this year's birthday would be particularly memorable. The Hand mobilized forces that had been waiting decades for this opportunity. Criminal organizations, terrorist cells, former Weapon X operatives, everyone who had ever dreamed of being the one to finally end the Wolverine saw their chance approaching. Logan ran. Not from fear. He had never run from fear in his life, and he would not start now. He ran because he needed answers. Someone had done this to him, had engineered a virus specifically designed to neutralize his healing factor. That kind of work required resources, expertise, and intimate knowledge of his mutation. The list of suspects was short, and every name on it pointed back to the same origin: Weapon X. The trail led him through the shadows of his past, to Madripoor, where old contacts provided fragments of information before dying, under circumstances that suggested someone was cleaning up loose ends, to Japan, where the ruins of Yoshida clan facilities held encrypted files that pointed toward a location Logan had hoped never to see again, to laboratories and safe houses and underground bunkers where the remnants of programs he had thought destroyed continued their work in secret. He travelled wounded, bleeding, feeling every impact of a life that had always demanded violence. Without his healing factor, the accumulated damage of decades began to surface. Old breaks that ached, old scars that pulled, the weight of years that his mutation had been holding at bay. For the first time, Logan felt old, truly old, in the way that mortal men felt old, with death no longer a distant abstraction but an approaching certainty. He found Dr. Abraham Cornelius in a facility hidden in the Nevada desert. The architect of Weapon X had survived, had aged, withered, become something barely recognizable as the man who had once stood over Logan's tank and watched adamantium being bonded to his bones. But his eyes remained the same, cold, clinical, utterly devoid of the empathy that might have made him hesitate before turning human beings into weapons. "You came," Cornelius said, with the satisfaction of a man whose plans were unfolding precisely as designed. "I knew you would. The virus was my invitation, my way of ensuring that when we finally finished our work you would be here to witness it." The laboratory was vast, filled with equipment that made the original Weapon X facility look primitive. Tanks lined the walls, dozens of them, each containing a human subject, suspended in green liquid, each connected to machinery designed to bond adamantium to bone. The test subjects were young, Logan realized. Children, some of them, kidnapped, purchased, or bred specifically for this purpose. "You're making more," Logan growled, his bone claws extending because the adamantium claws were gone, pulled from his body by Magneto, never replaced. "More weapons, more monsters." "Better weapons," Cornelius corrected. "The original program was flawed. We didn't understand your healing factor well enough to replicate it. But we've had decades to study, to refine, to perfect. These subjects have been genetically modified to survive the bonding process without your mutation. They will be everything you were, without the inconvenient independence that made you so difficult to control." Logan looked at the children in the tanks, innocent victims who had no idea what was about to be done to them, who would emerge from those pods as weapons without memory or identity, or hope. He thought of his own time in the tank, the pain, the violation, the years of struggling to reclaim some fragment of the humanity that had been stolen from him. "No," he said, "this ends here." The fight was brutal and brief. Without his healing factor, Logan could not afford to absorb damage the way he once had. Every wound mattered, every injury accumulated, every moment of combat brought him closer to a death that could no longer be postponed indefinitely. But he was still the Wolverine, still the best there was at what he did, even if what he did was not very nice. Cornelius's guards fell before his claws. The doctor himself retreated to the control room, initiating the bonding process in a desperate attempt to salvage his life's work. Adamantium began to heat in the injection systems, preparing to flow into the bodies of children who could not defend themselves. Logan reached the controls with seconds to spare. His claws, bone claws, the claws he had been born with, the claws that had first emerged on that terrible night at the Howlett estate, tore through the machinery, severing connections, destroying systems that had taken years to build. The adamantium erupted from its containment. Molten metal sprayed across the laboratory, coating everything in its path, walls, equipment, the body of Dr. Cornelius, who screamed as the liquid fire consumed him. And Logan, standing at the center of the destruction, felt the adamantium splash across his skin. He had saved the children. The bonding process had been interrupted before it could be completed. They would wake confused and traumatized, but they would wake human. They would not become weapons. The adamantium was cooling, hardening, forming a shell around Logan's body that his missing healing factor could not reject. He walked, through the laboratory, past the unconscious children, out into the Nevada desert where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold. Each step was harder than the last, the metal shell thickening, his joints stiffening, his body becoming a statue of the very substance that had defined him for so long. He thought of Mariko waiting for him in whatever came after. He thought of Jean, burning eternal in the heart of the Phoenix. He thought of Rose, the first person he had ever loved and lost, whose death had set him on a path that led inevitably to this moment. He thought of the X-Men, his family, his purpose, the people who had shown him that even a weapon could choose to be something more. They would mourn him, they would remember him, and they would continue fighting for Xavier's dream, even without the Wolverine at their side. The adamantium reached his face, creeping across his features like a silver tide. Logan turned to face the setting sun. He wanted the last thing he saw to be light, not darkness, warmth, not cold, the beauty of a world that had given him so much pain and so much purpose. The metal covered his eyes. The Wolverine died, standing, his claws extended, his face turned toward a horizon he could no longer see. The adamantium hardened into a statue that would stand in the desert for years, a monument to a man who had been a weapon and a hero, and in the end, simply human. The sun set, the stars emerged, and James Howlett, Logan, the Wolverine, was finally at peace. The news spread across a world that had learned to take the immortal mutant for granted. The X-Men gathered in grief, sharing stories of the man who had taught them that redemption was possible, that the worst among them could become the best, that family was not a matter of blood but of choice. Villains raised glasses in relief and celebration, their longest nightmare finally concluded, and somewhere, in the vast reaches of whatever lay beyond death, a soul that had carried so much weight was finally allowed to rest. But rest, for the Wolverine, was never permanent, and neither was death. The adamantium tomb stood in the desert for 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days. Pilgrims came to visit. Mutants who remembered what the Wolverine had meant. Humans who had feared him. Enemies who needed to see the proof of his death with their own eyes. The X-Men posted guards initially, then removed them when it became clear that no one intended to disturb the remains. The statue became a monument, a landmark, a testament to the man who had finally found the peace that had eluded him in life. Then someone stole the body. The theft was discovered during a routine patrol. The adamantium shell simply gone, removed by means that left no trace, no evidence, no indication of who had taken it or why. The X-Men launched an investigation that spanned continents, following leads that dissolved into dead ends, chasing rumors that proved to be nothing more than wishful thinking or malicious deception. The hunt for Wolverine consumed months of effort and produced no answers. What none of them knew, what Logan himself would not remember until much later, was that he had not been dead inside that shell. His healing factor, suppressed by the virus that Cornelius had engineered, had not been destroyed. It had been dormant, waiting, gathering strength in the darkness of his adamantium coffin. When the metal was finally removed, when the organization called Cetera extracted his body for their own purposes, the mutation that had kept him alive for over a century and a half finally reasserted itself. Logan woke in a laboratory, surrounded by strangers who expected him to be grateful. Persephone led Cetera, a shadowy organization whose goals involved nothing less than the reshaping of human civilization according to their own design. She had resurrected Logan not out of compassion but out of utility, recognizing that the Wolverine was too valuable an asset to leave buried in the Nevada sand. Her technology had purged the virus, restored his healing factor, freed him from the adamantium prison that had become his grave. In return, she expected obedience. She had not studied her history carefully enough. The escape from Sotera was violent, chaotic, and ultimately successful. Logan carved his way through facilities and personnel with the same brutal efficiency that had defined his entire existence, refusing to be controlled, refusing to serve, refusing to accept that his resurrection came with strings attached. Persephone's organization crumbled in his wake, another enemy destroyed by the simple miscalculation of believing the Wolverine could be tamed. He emerged into a world that had learned to live without him. The adjustment was harder than any battle he had ever fought. 3 years had passed, 3 years in which the X-Men had mourned and moved on, in which his absence had become accepted, in which others had risen to fill the void he left behind. The mansion still stood, but its halls felt different. The faces were familiar, but they looked at him with uncertainty rather than recognition. He was a ghost returning to a world that had already held his funeral. Laura Kinney had taken the name Wolverine. His daughter, clone, creation, the closest thing to a child his biology could produce, had inherited his mantle and made it her own. She wore the yellow and blue with pride and purpose, fighting for Xavier's dream with a ferocity that matched his own, and a moral clarity that sometimes exceeded it. She was everything he had hoped she could become, everything he had feared he could never be. Logan watched her from a distance, uncertain whether to feel pride or obsolescence. Dakin remained complicated. His son, the child cut from Itsu's dying womb, raised by Romulus to hate the father he had never known, had walked his own path through darkness and occasional redemption. Their relationship was a minefield of old wounds and older betrayals, of blood shed on both sides, of love that neither knew how to express. But Daken was alive, and he was trying, and perhaps that was enough. The dead did not stay dead. Logan knew this better than anyone, but the relationships damaged by death and absence could not be healed simply by returning to life. His time in the adamantium tomb had not been empty. Fragments surfaced in dreams, visions of a place beyond death where the rules of the physical world did not apply. He remembered Jean there, or something that wore Jean's face, burning with phoenix fire that was warmth rather than destruction. He remembered conversations that might have been real or might have been his dying brain's final fantasies. He remembered a choice being offered, rest or return. He had chosen to return. He always chose to return. The fight was not finished, would never be finished, as long as there were people who needed protecting and enemies who needed stopping. The world had changed during his absence. Mutant kind had established Krakoa, a living island nation where their kind could finally exist without persecution, where the dream Xavier had articulated decades ago had taken physical form. Logan walked its shores with wonder and suspicion in equal measure, recognizing the beauty of what had been built while understanding the dangers that such isolation could breed. He took his place on the Quiet Council, the governing body that determined Krakoan law and policy. He led X-Force, the Black Ops team that handled threats too dangerous or too morally ambiguous for public acknowledgement. He trained young mutants in the arts of survival, passing on knowledge that had cost him everything to acquire. He was an elder statesman now, a living legend, the man who had died and returned, who had lost everything and somehow found purpose again. But he was still Logan, still the man with claws in his hands and rage in his heart, still the weapon that had chosen to be a hero, the animal that had chosen to be a man, still fighting, still bleeding, still refusing to surrender to a universe that seemed determined to break him. The years ahead would bring new challenges, new enemies, new losses that would add to the weight he already carried. He would die again. He was certain of this, as certain as he was of anything. And he would return again, because that was what he did. That was who he was, the Wolverine, the best there is at what he does, and what he does when all the blood is washed away and all the bodies are buried is survive. He survives so others do not have to. He carries the darkness so others can walk in light. He remembers the dead so their sacrifices are not forgotten. As long as there are battles to fight, he will fight them. As long as there are people to protect, He will protect them. As long as the world needs a Wolverine, Logan will answer the call. This is his burden. This is his purpose. This is his gift and his curse, intertwined so completely that he can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. He is immortal. He is eternal. He is the Wolverine. And his story is never truly over.